If you ever walk through Old Cahaba after dark, and you hear a man calling names from a place where no building stands anymore, do not answer. Because at Cahaba, some names were not lost to history. They were stolen. And the dead have been waiting for someone to say the right one. Welcome to Infinite Story Realm, where true places, buried history, and the unexplained meet in the dark. Tonight's story takes us to Old Cahaba, Alabama, the state's first capital, a forgotten ghost town by the rivers, and the site of a Civil War prison whose echoes may never have gone silent. Old Cahaba was the first state capital of Alabama, and is now known as a historic ghost town. It was also home to the Civil War prisoner of war camp, Cahaba Federal Prison, also known as Castle Morgan, located near the confluence of the Alabama and Cahaba rivers. Historical records indicate that this prison held over 3,000 Union prisoners by the end of the war, and many, upon their release, boarded the Sultana. The steamboat exploded on April 27, 1865. One of the deadliest maritime disasters in U.S. history. Daniel Reed had never believed in ghosts. He believed in sound. He believed in the way wind could bend when it moved through bare trees. He believed in the creak of old floorboards contracting when the temperature dropped. He believed in water seeping under soil after long rains. He believed that if a person stood in darkness long enough, the mind would eventually invent the very thing it feared most. So when he received a contract to record ambient sound for a nighttime tour at Old Cahaba Archaeological Park, he saw it as a good side job. $3,000 for 4 nights of recording. For a single father trying to earn more time with his daughter, $3,000 could cover rent, fix the old truck, and pay at least 2 months of piano lessons for Emily. Daniel lived in Montgomery, a little more than an hour from Old Cahaba. He worked as a freelance audio technician, editing podcasts, cleaning background noise for wedding videos, and recording local advertisements. The work was unstable, but he liked it. To Daniel, sound had always been more honest than images. Images could be staged, light could lie, but sound was different. Sound always left a trace. The woman who contacted him was Evelyn Carter, an elderly volunteer at the site. Her southern accent was slow and polite, but there was something in the way she gave instructions over the phone that reminded Daniel of old people warning children not to run near a riverbank. "You only need to record during the day," she said. "Wind, footsteps on the old roads, the river, insects at dusk. We want the tour to feel authentic." "But the contract lists 4 nights," Daniel replied. The line went quiet for a moment. "Yes," Evelyn said. "Some sounds only come out after dark." Daniel gave a small laugh, assuming she was joking. She did not laugh. On Monday afternoon, Daniel drove to Old Cahaba. The road into the park was narrow and empty, woods pressed in on both sides. Vines hung over low branches. Tall grass rose from wet ground. Certain low patches still held moisture from recent rain. Old Cahaba was not like the ghost towns people imagined for movies, with rows of sun-bleached wooden buildings standing in a desert. This place had been swallowed back by the earth. The roads were still there, but in many places they had become little more than paths through grass. Old foundations lay under moss. The brick columns of the Crotcheron mansion stood in silence, like the rib bones of some enormous animal that had died long ago. Daniel stopped near the visitor center. Evelyn Carter was waiting on the porch with a brown folder in her hands. If you ever walk through Old Cahaba after dark, and you hear a man calling names from a place where no building stands anymore, do not answer, because at Cahaba, some names were not lost to history. They were stolen, and the dead have been waiting for someone to say the right one. Welcome to Infinite Story Realm, where true places, buried history, and the unexplained meet in the dark. Tonight's story takes us to Old Cahaba, Alabama, the state's first capital, a forgotten ghost town by the rivers, and the site of a Civil War prison whose echoes may never have gone silent. Daniel Reed had never believed in ghosts. He believed in sound. He believed in the way wind could bend when it moved through bare trees. He believed in the creak of old floorboards contracting when the temperature dropped. He believed in water seeping under soil after long rains. He believed that if a person stood in darkness long enough, the mind would eventually invent the very thing it feared most. So when he received a contract to record ambient sound for a nighttime tour at Old Cahaba Archaeological Park, he saw it as a good side job. $3,000 for 4 nights of recording. For a single father trying to earn more time with his daughter, $3,000 could cover rent, fix the old truck, and pay at least 2 months of piano lessons for Emily. Daniel lived in Montgomery, a little more than an hour from Old Cahaba. He worked as a freelance audio technician, editing podcasts, cleaning background noise for wedding videos, and recording local advertisements. The work was unstable, but he liked it. To Daniel, sound had always been more honest than images. Images could be staged, light could lie, but sound was different. Sound always left a trace. The woman who contacted him was Evelyn Carter, an elderly volunteer at the site. Her southern accent was slow and polite, but there was something in the way she gave instructions over the phone that reminded Daniel of old people warning children not to run near a riverbank. "You only need to record during the day," she said. "Wind, footsteps on the old roads, the river, insects at dusk. We want the tour to feel authentic." "But the contract lists 4 nights," Daniel replied. The line went quiet for a moment. "Yes," Evelyn said. "Some sounds only come out after dark." Daniel gave a small laugh, assuming she was joking. She did not laugh. On Monday afternoon, Daniel drove to Old Cahaba. The road into the park was narrow and empty. Woods pressed in on both sides. Vines hung over low branches. Tall grass rose from wet ground. Certain low patches still held moisture from recent rain. Old Cahaba was not like the ghost towns people imagined for movies, with rows of sun-bleached wooden buildings standing in a desert. This place had been swallowed back by the earth. The roads were still there, but in many places they had become little more than paths through grass. Old foundations lay under moss. The brick columns of the Crotcheron mansion stood in silence, like the rib bones of some enormous animal that had died long ago. Daniel stopped near the visitor center. Evelyn Carter was waiting on the porch with a brown folder in her hands. She was around 70, small-framed, with silver hair pinned neatly at the back of her head. A silver cross hung from a chain around her neck. But what Daniel noticed first were the rubber boots she wore, even though it had not rained that day. "Mr. Reed." "Daniel is fine." She shook his hand. Her hand was cold and dry. "Thank you for coming. I listened to some of the podcasts you worked on. Very clean sound." "Thank you. I'll do my best." Evelyn handed him the folder. "This is the site map. I marked the places we need recorded. The Castle Morgan Prison Foundation, the old cemetery, Crotcheron, the road toward the river, and the area near what used to be Arch Street." Daniel flipped through the map. Several locations were circled in red ink.
Anywhere I should avoid? Evelyn looked at him. Yes. Daniel lifted his eyes. After 9 o'clock at night, if you hear roll call, don't answer. He waited for her to explain. She turned toward the trail instead. Come on. I'll show you the grounds before the light goes. Old Cahaba was beautiful in the late afternoon, but in a strange way. Sunlight filtered through the trees and scattered pale gold across the ground. Wind moved through dry leaves with the soft sound of someone turning pages in an empty room. Evelyn walked ahead, speaking about Cahaba as if she were speaking about a relative who had died many years ago. This was once Alabama's first capital. There were government buildings, churches, schools, houses, warehouses, and a river landing. Then floods, disease, war, and time took it all away. They stopped before a flat stretch of ground where only low traces remained. This is where Castle Morgan stood, she said. The prison. Daniel looked around. There were no high walls, no bars, no clear sign that a prison had ever existed here. Only grass, trees, damp soil, and the late-day drone of cicadas. Hard to imagine more than 3,000 men held here, he said. Hard to imagine, Evelyn replied, but the ground remembers. Daniel set up a directional microphone, put on his headphones, and turned on the recorder. Immediately, the world changed. Through the headphones, every sound became sharper. Insects brushing wings in the grass, a bird tapping somewhere far away, the river low and heavy like the breathing of someone in a deep sleep. Then came a light metallic clink. Break time equals 0. 6S/. Daniel turned. Did you hear that? Hear what? A clink, like a tin cup against bars. Evelyn did not answer right away. She looked at the ground near his feet. On the dry mud, a thin streak of water had appeared, just a narrow line, as if someone had dragged a wet foot across the dirt. Daniel removed his headphones. The sound vanished. Probably groundwater, he said. Maybe. But Evelyn's eyes did not leave the wet mark. On the first night, Daniel set up his equipment near the Castle Morgan Foundation. He told himself he would only stay until 9. He would record insects, wind, and a few night ambience tracks, then drive back to his motel in Selma. The sun dropped behind the trees. Darkness did not fall over Old Cahaba all at once. It rose from the ground. It spilled out of the old foundations, the drainage cuts, and the direction of the river. Slowly, it covered the trunks, the signs, and the trails. 8:40 p.m. Daniel sat in a folding chair, watching the audio levels flicker on the recorder's screen. Everything was normal. Insects, wind, branches touching one another. 8:52 p.m. A strange sound came through his headphones. Very faint. Daniel held his breath. A man coughing. Not nearby. A dry, weak cough echoing from inside an enclosed space. He turned the microphone. The sound became clearer. Then came a whisper. Water. Daniel stood. Hello. No one answered. He removed the headphones and swept his flashlight across the ground. No one was there. When he put the headphones back on, the whisper was gone. Only the wind remained. 8:59 p.m. Daniel started packing up. Just as he lifted the tripod, a knock sounded in his headphones. Like knuckles on wood. Then a man's voice spoke, hoarse, distant, but clear. Roll call. Daniel froze. Another voice answered. James O'Neill. Pause. Present. A third voice. Thomas Avery. Present. Daniel felt the skin on the back of his neck tighten. He ripped off the headphones. Nothing. He put them back on. The voice continued. Samuel Pike. Present. Then came a long silence. Daniel looked at his watch. 9 o'clock exactly. The roll caller spoke again. Elias Reed. Daniel yanked the headphones from his ears. That name, Reed. He told himself it was a coincidence. Reed was not a rare name. Thousands of people had carried it. But his hands still shook when he turned off the recorder. Before he left, he heard water. Not river water. The sound of water rising inside a closed room. The next morning, Daniel opened the recording in his motel room in Selma. He expected to discover that he had misheard everything. Distorted wind, a dry branch hitting the mic stand, a night animal moving through the brush. But when he dropped the file into his editing software, the section after 8:52 showed strange frequency patterns. He played it through the speakers. Water! The whisper was clear. Daniel moved forward to 9 o'clock. Roll call. The names followed. James O'Neill, Thomas Avery, Samuel Pike. And then, Elias Reed. No one answered. Daniel replayed it. The voice said that name more slowly than the others, as if whoever was calling knew the person being called was close. He called Evelyn. She did not sound surprised. You stayed past 9? I left right after. But you heard it. Who is Elias Reed? The other end went silent. I don't know, she said. Daniel did not believe her. I need to see the prisoner records. You were hired to record sound, not investigate. You told me not to answer roll call. That means you knew. Evelyn exhaled slowly. Come to the visitor center. I'll open the archive room. But Daniel. Yes. If that name is connected to yours, you especially must not answer. The archive room at Old Cahaba was small and tucked behind the visitor center. Metal cabinets lined the walls. There were boxes of documents, copied maps, old photographs, and archaeological reports. Evelyn placed a stack of photocopies in front of Daniel. Castle Morgan's records are incomplete, she said. Lists were lost. Names were misspelled. Some men died after leaving here, so tracing them can be difficult. Daniel turned page after page. Old names, old handwriting, units, captured dates, transfer notes. Is there an Elias Reed? Evelyn slid a plastic-sleeved page toward him. Near the bottom was a line. Reed Elias, 3rd Ohio Cavalry, captured near Selma, transferred March 1865. Daniel read it again and again. I don't have ancestors in Ohio, he said. My family has been in Alabama for generations. Are you sure? My father said our family lived in Dallas County after the Civil War. Farmers, mechanics, truck drivers. No Union soldiers. Evelyn watched him for a long time. Sometimes a name doesn't follow blood. Sometimes it follows a debt. The sentence made Daniel uncomfortable. He photographed the page and left. All day he tried to focus on editing the recordings, but the name Elias Reed stayed in his head. That afternoon, Emily called on video. She was 10 years old, with brown hair and bright eyes like her mother. She was staying with her grandmother in Birmingham. Dad, are you working in a ghost town? Yeah, but it's not as scary as you think. Are there ghosts? Daniel almost said no. Then he remembered the roll call. Only mosquitoes, he said. Emily laughed. Behind her, the Bluetooth speaker on a table suddenly crackled. Emily turned around. Did you send me a file? No. Static hissed from the speaker. Then came 3 knocks. Daniel sat upright. Emily, turn that speaker off. She frowned. But it's calling someone's name. The static grew louder. Then a distant man's voice spoke. Elias Reed. Daniel nearly shouted. Turn it off. Emily panicked and pulled the cord from the speaker. The sound stopped at once. Dad, what was that? Daniel forced his voice to stay calm. Just a connection glitch. Don't turn that speaker on again. Okay? Are you scared? He looked at his daughter's face on the screen. For the first time in years, Daniel did not know how to lie. No, he said. I'm just tired. On the second night, Daniel did not want to go back. But $3,000 was still $3,000. And another part of him, the most stubborn, foolish part, wanted to prove that all of this had an explanation. This time, he set up near Crocheron, where the remaining brick columns stood among the trees like the ruins of a gateway. Evelyn walked with him until dusk. Don't record by the river tonight, she warned. Why? The water is low. Why is low water dangerous? At Cahaba, low water is what frightens me. When the water pulls back, buried things show themselves. She handed him an old oil lantern. Daniel laughed softly. I have a flashlight. I know. Then what's this for? If you see another light in the woods, don't follow it. Light this and stand still. Evelyn, I need you to be honest with me. Has anyone ever disappeared here? She looked toward the trees. People have gotten lost. People have been hurt. People have claimed they saw things they should not have seen, but disappeared in the way police never found a body. She paused. Not in my time. In your time. Cahaba has many times, Daniel. Not all of them are on a calendar. She left before he could ask anything else. Night settled in. Daniel let the recorder run while he walked around the brick columns taking reference photos. He tried to keep his imagination at a distance. But old Cahaba at night was not the same place it had been in daylight. The old roads seemed to shift position. A sign he had seen in the afternoon was now hidden behind shadow and branches. The river sounded near, then far, as if the water were quietly circling him. 8:50 p.m. The recorder suddenly showed a signal overload. Daniel hurried back. Through the headphones came the sound of many people. Not one or two voices. Hundreds. Coughing. Groaning. Praying. Someone calling for his mother. Someone cursing. Water slapping wood. Then the roll call began. James O'Neill. Present. Thomas Avery. Present. Samuel Pike. Present. Daniel swept his flashlight across the columns. No one was there. Elias Reed. This time, after the name, there was another sound. A man breathing hard, very close to the microphone. Daniel gripped the headphones. A whisper said, "Don't take my name." Daniel backed away. From the woods came a light. A small yellow glow, swaying between the tree trunks. An oil lantern. Daniel remembered Evelyn's warning. If you see another light in the woods, don't follow it. But the light did not move away, stayed still as if waiting. Then from the dark came the sound of a child crying. Not Emily's voice, but close enough to pull tight around Daniel's heart. Daddy! He knew it could not be his daughter. He knew, but his feet moved anyway. The lantern light drifted deeper into the woods. Emily? Daniel called softly. The crying moved farther away. He stepped through tall grass, over an old brick foundation, and between trees that grew close together. His phone lost signal. His flashlight flickered twice, then died. Daniel stood in darkness. The lantern ahead was still there. Then he heard water. Very loud, as if a river had opened right in front of him. He bent down and managed to turn the flashlight back on. When the beam flashed out, Daniel saw that he was standing at the edge of a muddy depression. One more step and he would have fallen in. At the bottom, something protruded from the mud. A small piece of metal. Daniel knelt and pulled it free. It was an old prisoner tag, rusted almost through, but a few hand-carved letters remained. E. Reed. On the back of the tag was a deep cut, as if it had been slashed with a knife. When Daniel lifted his head, the lantern was gone. But behind him, in the darkness, hundreds of voices whispered together, "Not him, not him." The next morning, Daniel brought the metal tag to Evelyn. The moment she saw it, she sat down. "Where did you find this?" "Near Crocheron, in a mud hollow." "That's impossible." "Why?" She took off her glasses. Her hands trembled slightly. "Because I buried it 37 years ago." Daniel said nothing. Evelyn stared at the tag as if it were an old wound. "When I was 32, my father watched over this place. Old Cahaba wasn't managed the way it is now. People came to drink, hunt relics, and dig where they had no right to dig. One night, my father found that tag near the Castle Morgan Foundation. After that, he began hearing roll call. Did he answer?" Evelyn did not answer immediately. "His last name was Carter, not Reed. But every night the voice called Elias Reed. On the 7th night, my father shouted, 'He's dead!' Then what happened?" The next morning, he was standing in our yard, soaked from head to foot. He said he had been in a roofless brick room. Water had risen to his chest. Around him were men in torn uniforms. They weren't looking at him. They were looking at someone behind him. "Who?" "A man with a roll book." Daniel's throat went dry. "Did your father survive?" "Yes, but he never came back here. Before he died, he told me to bury the tag where the lantern led me. I did. I thought that was the end of it. It wasn't." "No," she whispered, "because you came." Daniel placed the tag on the table. "What do you know about Elias Reed?" Evelyn stood, opened a cabinet, and took out a small wooden box. "I didn't want to give this to you, but maybe it has been waiting for you." Inside was a copy of an old journal. It had been written by a prisoner named Jonathan Bell, who had once been held at Castle Morgan. Some pages described flooding, hunger, sickness, and men packed together inside an unfinished warehouse. Evelyn opened to a marked page. Daniel read, March 3rd, 1865. Water has risen into the yard. We stood on crates, on one another's shoulders, on anything that remained dry. A man named Elias Reed was called out before roll. They said he had been exchanged early, but that night I heard him inside the wall. He said someone had taken his name. Daniel read the last sentence twice. Inside the wall? Evelyn nodded. There are stories that some prisoners were locked separately in storage holes or punishment spaces. There is no proof. Daniel turned to the next page. The man with the book wears no uniform. He belongs to neither side. He calls the names of the dead and marks the living. Some say he works for the prison. Some say he works for the river. Daniel felt sick. Who is the man with the book? Evelyn spoke very softly. No one knows his true name. In a few local stories, they call him the clerk. On the third night, Daniel did not record. He drove back to Montgomery and went to his mother's house. Linda Reed lived in a small home filled with old photographs and the smell of cinnamon tea. Arthritis made her walk slowly, but her memory was still sharp. When Daniel asked about their ancestors, she frowned. Why are you asking about that all of a sudden? Did anyone in our family have the name Elias? The teacup in her hand went still. Who told you that name? Daniel placed the rusted tag on the table. Her face went pale. Where did you get this? Old Cahaba. Linda closed her eyes. I thought that story died with your father. Dad knew. Your father didn't believe in ghosts, but he believed in guilt. Daniel sat across from her. Tell me. Linda was quiet for a long time. Outside on the porch, a wind chime rang softly. Your great-great-grandfather was not a good man, she said. At least that's what your grandmother told me. His name was Nathaniel Reed. He worked around Cahaba after the war. No one knew if he was a soldier, a clerk, a trader, or just a man who knew how to live off confusion. There was one story in the family that no one was allowed to mention. Nathaniel came home with another man's papers. Daniel felt the cold move through him. Elias Reed. Linda nodded. Maybe. Your grandmother said Nathaniel was not born a Reed. He took that name after the war, from the release papers of a prisoner. Then what was our real name? I don't know. Daniel looked at the tag. He stole a prisoner's name? Maybe. And that prisoner died? Linda clasped her hands together. Some nights, your father dreamed of water. He said someone was calling to him from under the floor. After you were born, he burned almost all the family papers. He said he didn't want the name to find you. But it found me. Linda looked at him with wet eyes. Don't go back to Cahaba. I have to end this. No, Daniel. You don't understand. Those men don't need your help. They need someone to answer. Answer what? Linda whispered. Present. On the fourth night, Daniel returned to Old Cahaba. He told Evelyn he was only coming to return the equipment. But in his backpack were the E-Read tag, the copy journal pages, a small recorder, and the old oil lantern she had given him. He had spent the night reading about the Sultana, about prisoners who survived Cahaba only to die on the Mississippi River, about chaotic passenger lists, overcrowding, corruption, missing records, repeated names, vanished men, and bodies no one ever claimed. Daniel did not know how much he believed, but he knew one thing. A man named Elias Reed had been robbed of his identity. And since 1865, someone in Cahaba had still been calling his name. Daniel waited until Evelyn left the park. He hid his truck behind the visitor center, then walked to the Castle Morgan site. The sky was moonless. The air was thick and wet. The grass under his boots was damp, though there had been no rain all day. 8:55 p.m. Daniel set the recorder on the ground. He took out the E-Read tag and placed it beside the machine. Elias Reed, he said into the darkness. I don't know who you were, but if my family took something that belonged to you, I am returning it. The wind stopped, completely. No insects, no leaves, no river. 9 o'clock. The knocking began. Then the roll caller spoke. James O'Neill. From the dark, a voice answered. Present. Thomas Avery. Present. Samuel Pike. Present. Daniel saw the empty ground before him begin to change. Not like a movie. There was no flash of light, no clean vision. The darkness simply thickened and arranged itself into shapes. A high brick wall, a wooden barrier, men packed shoulder to shoulder, thin backs, torn coats, hollow eyes, the smell of mud, sweat, sickness, and trapped water filled his lungs. The roll call continued. Elias Reed. Daniel gripped the tag. He did not answer. A man stepped out from the crowd. He was so thin that his prison clothes hung loosely from his shoulders. His face was sunken, his beard patchy, his eyes young and yet terribly old. Dark marks circled his wrists. Daniel knew at once that this was Elias. The man looked at the tag in Daniel's hand. His lips moved. Not mine anymore. Daniel stared at him. I came to return it. Elias slowly shook his head. Behind the prisoners came the scratch of a pen. Daniel looked past them. A wooden desk had appeared. Behind it sat a man in a black coat with a high collar, his head bent over a large book. Shadow covered most of his face. Only his hands were clear, long, pale, and stained with mud beneath the nails. The clerk. He dipped his pen into a bottle, but the bottle did not hold ink. It held black river water. He read again. Elias Reed. No prisoner answered. Daniel turned to Elias. What do you want? Elias opened his mouth. The sound that came out was not quite a voice. It was water rushing through brick. Name was taken. Door was opened. River remembers. Daniel looked at the clerk. Nathaniel took your name? For the first time, the clerk lifted his head. Beneath the brim of his black hat, there were no eyes, only two dark sockets filled with water. He smiled. Names are boats, he said. Every man needs one to cross. Daniel understood. Nathaniel had not only taken papers to escape. He had taken a boat meant for Elias, a place on a list, a release identity, a way out of the prison, a path to the river. And maybe that stolen name had carried him toward a journey that should have belonged to someone else. Did Nathaniel die on the Sultana? Daniel asked. The clerk laughed softly. Not all who boarded died. Not all who stayed lived. Cold moved through Daniel's bones. What do you want me to do? The clerk turned the book toward him. On the yellowed page were rows of names. Many had been crossed out. Some were blurred by water. Near the bottom was one line, Elias Reed unanswered. Beneath it, a new line was slowly appearing. Daniel Reed pending. Daniel stepped back. No. The clerk offered him the pen. The prisoners watched. Not angry, not begging, only waiting. From somewhere far away, Daniel heard Emily's voice. Daddy! He turned. In the dark, his daughter stood beside the wooden barrier. She wore blue pajamas. Her feet were bare. Her hair was tangled. Her eyes were closed, as if she were sleepwalking. Emily! Daniel ran toward her, but the ground beneath him became water. He fell to his knees, cold mud swallowing his hands. Emily opened her eyes, but they were not her eyes. They were two water-filled sockets, the same as the clerk's. His voice came from Emily's mouth. Every debt follows blood. Daniel understood that if he ran, the name would keep moving. From him to Emily, from Emily to her children. A family built on a stolen name would never escape the roll call. He looked at Elias Reed. The prisoner stood silently. There was no hatred in his face, only exhaustion that had lasted more than a century. Daniel asked, If I answer, will you be free? Elias did not speak, but the men behind him began to part, revealing a narrow path. At the end of that path were river sounds and distant firelight, like a burning steamboat in fog. Daniel turned on his recorder and placed it on the clerk's desk. If I do this, the truth has to be recorded. The clerk tilted his head. Daniel took the pen. His hand shook so badly he could barely write. He crossed out the line, Daniel Reed pending. Then beside Elias Reed, unanswered, he wrote, Name stolen by Nathaniel. Debt returned by Daniel. The clerk stared at the words. His smile disappeared. For the first time, the prisoners stirred. Not with fear, with the sound of a door opening somewhere outside the rules of this place. The clerk slammed a hand onto the desk. Roll call. His voice was no longer calm. It broke into water, splitting wood, and exploding metal. Elias Reed. Daniel looked directly at Elias. He knew what he was about to do would change everything. He also knew he could not say present. Answering for a dead man meant stepping into his place. That had been the trap. Daniel took a deep breath. Then he said, Elias Reed is not present. The clerk went still. Daniel continued, each word clear. Because he was never called by his right name. The prisoners fell silent. Daniel turned to Elias. What is your true name? Elias looked at him. In that instant, the black water in his eyes receded. A weak light appeared there, like dawn after a flood. He whispered, Elias Whitcomb. Daniel froze. Whitcomb. Not Reed. Elias Reed had never existed. The stolen name had not been one man's identity. It had been an empty shell, a false name the clerk had used for more than a century to keep the dead alive. Because if no one knew the true name, no one could free the man trapped beneath it. Daniel took the pen and wrote on the page, Elias Whitcomb present. This time, the prisoner himself stepped forward. He placed his thin hand over the written line. Present, he said. The ground shook. From invisible walls, water burst outward. Hundreds of voices rose together, no longer whispering, no longer groaning, but sounding like men who had finally been allowed to breathe after far too long. The clerk screamed. Smoke rose from the book. The lines of names faded one by one. The prisoners turned and walked toward the light at the end of the path. Some cried, some laughed, some lowered their heads and held torn caps against their chests. Elias Whitcomb was the last. Before he stepped away, he looked at Daniel. River keeps what men hide, he said, but truth crosses. Then he vanished into the distant firelight. Daniel woke at dawn, lying on wet ground near the Castle Morgan site. The recorder was still running. The Reed tag had broken in two. Evelyn found him around 6 that morning. When Daniel told her what had happened, she said nothing. She only took him back to the visitor center, made him hot coffee, and helped him open the recording. From 9 o'clock to nearly 10, there were no ghost voices, no roll call, no clerk, only Daniel breathing hard, the wind, and water far away. Then, in the final minute, a man's voice sounded very softly. Elias Whitcomb, present. Evelyn began to cry. 1 month later, Old Cahaba added a small information panel near the Castle Morgan Foundation. It did not mention ghosts. It did not claim anything supernatural. It simply noted that some wartime records were lost, incomplete, or inaccurate, and that local oral history sometimes preserved names official documents did not. Daniel never told the full story publicly. He accepted the contract money, paid rent, fixed the truck, and took Emily out for ice cream at the end of the week, just as he had promised. Life slowly became normal again, almost. Until the night of April 27th, the date the Sultana exploded. Daniel was at home editing a commercial podcast when Emily walked out of her bedroom. "Dad," she said, still half asleep, "someone's calling you." Daniel looked at his phone on the table. The screen was dark. "No one's calling." Emily pointed to the old Bluetooth speaker, the same one he had put away in a drawer after the first night. It was sitting on the kitchen table, turned on by itself. This blue light blinked. Daniel walked toward it slowly. Static hissed from the speaker. Then came 3 knocks. Daniel felt his heart drop. A man's voice spoke, not the clerk's voice, not Elias's voice. It was Daniel's own voice, but older, more exhausted, soaked through. "Roll call." Emily took his hand. "Dad, why does that sound like you?" Daniel did not answer. Through the static, the older version of his voice read a name. Not Elias Reed. Not Elias Whitcomb. A name Daniel had never heard in his life. An old, unfamiliar name buried beneath more than a century of silence. Nathaniel Crow. Daniel stood motionless. His mother had said no one knew the family's true name before they became Reed. Now he knew. From the speaker, the old voice called again. Nathaniel Crow. A long silence followed. Then from beneath the floor, where there was no basement, no water pipe, and nothing below the dry concrete slab, a very faint voice answered, "Present," and every light in the house went out. So if a voice calls your name in the dark, remember this. Not every roll call is meant for the living. And not every silence means the dead have forgiven. If this story pulled you into the shadows of Cahaba, subscribe to Infinite Story Realm. Leave a comment with the name of another haunted American place you want us to explore, and turn on notifications. The next story may begin somewhere familiar and end with a name you wish you had never heard. Before you listen to this story, remember one thing. Bachelor's Grove Cemetery is a real place. It sits hidden inside the forest preserve southwest of Chicago, surrounded by old trees, broken stones, and a road that many people say should not exist after dark. For decades, witnesses have claimed to see impossible things there. A black car driving through the woods without a driver, a white house that appears between the trees and then vanishes, strange lights over the cemetery, and a woman in white who seems to be waiting for someone to finally tell the truth. Tonight's story follows Lynn Tran, an audio editor who does not believe in ghosts. She knows how fear is made. A little static, a little silence, a sound placed where the listener does not expect it. But when a cassette tape from her dead father leads her to Bachelor's Grove, Lynn discovers that some hauntings are not asking to be feared. They are asking to be remembered. And once the road remembers your voice, it may never let you leave the story again. While it was initially about Stull Cemetery, details like the phantom car and the vanishing ghost house actually align much better with Bachelor's Grove Cemetery. Therefore, I am developing the story based on Bachelor's Grove Cemetery in the southwest suburbs of Chicago, near Midlothian and Oak Forest, in Cook County, Illinois. This location sits deeply within the Rubio Woods Forest Preserve and is connected to the Old Midlothian Turnpike. Famous legends surrounding Bachelor's Grove include the phantom car, the vanishing ghost house, mysterious lights, the white lady, and a 1991 infrared photo that is widely considered one of the most famous ghost pictures ever taken at this cemetery. Some places are abandoned because people forget them. Other places are abandoned because they do not want to be remembered. Bachelor's Grove Cemetery is a small burial ground hidden inside Rubio Woods, in the southwestern suburbs of Chicago. By daylight, it looks like almost nothing at all. A fenced patch of old earth, a few leaning headstones, broken markers swallowed by weeds, and thin trees standing around it like witnesses that have seen too much and learned to stay quiet. But after sunset, people tell a different story. They talk about an old black car that appears on a road no one uses anymore. They talk about a white house that shows up in the trees, complete with a front porch and glowing windows, only to vanish when someone gets close. They talk about a woman in a white dress. Sometimes she is holding a baby. Sometimes she stands alone beyond the cemetery fence, watching the living with the patience of someone waiting for an answer that has been delayed for 100 years. Lynn Tran had heard those stories many times, and she did not believe a single one of them. Lynn was 32 years old and worked as a freelance audio editor for a podcast called The Chicago Night Files. Her job was simple: remove unwanted breaths, clean up background noise, add a little wind, a few floorboard creaks, a distant radio hiss, and make ordinary ghost stories sound just frightening enough to keep people listening in the dark. She understood exactly how fear was made: a silence placed in the right spot, a small sound tucked behind a narrator's voice, a sentence cut off before the listener had time to understand it. To Lynn, ghosts were often nothing more than post-production. Then, in the fall of that year, an unmarked envelope arrived at her apartment. Inside were three things: an old cassette tape, a faded photograph with yellowing edges, and a handwritten note in black ink: "Do not make the Bachelor's Grove episode. If you still make it, never follow the car." The handwriting belonged to her father. Quang Tran had been dead for 6 months. Lynn's father had driven a taxi in Chicago for more than 20 years. He was a quiet man, always punctual, never drunk, never reckless, and never interested in ghost stories. When Lynn was a child, she once asked him if cemeteries scared him. He answered without looking away from the road: "The dead are not as frightening as the living." But there was one strange habit Lynn never understood. Every time his taxi came near Rubio Woods, he changed route. Even if it made the drive longer, even if a passenger complained, even if snow was falling and the meter kept running, he would not drive past the old road near Bachelor's Grove. Lynn always assumed it was just the routine of an older driver who knew the city in his own private way. But now, with her father's warning in her hands, she began to understand that he might have been hiding something. That night, she placed the cassette into an old tape recorder she had bought online for work. She put on her headphones and pressed play. At first, there was only static. Then came a shallow breath. Her father's voice, older, weaker, but unmistakably his. "Lynn, if you are hearing this," then someone sent the tape. A long silence followed. "I do not know whether you remember this. When you were 8 years old, I disappeared for one night. Your mother told you I had been in a small accident. That was not true." Static swelled over the tape, as if wind were blowing directly into the microphone. "That night, I drove a woman to Bachelor's Grove." Lynn sat up straight. Her father continued. "She wore a white dress. She was holding a baby. I was done taking fares for the night, but she was standing in the middle of the road. I slammed the brakes. When I opened the door and asked where she needed to go, she said only one thing. The cassette produced a sound that was not her father's voice. It was a woman whispering from very far away, 'Take me home.'" Lynn pulled off the headphones. Her apartment was completely still. Outside the window, Chicago kept glowing. Cars moved far below. A distant horn sounded. The heater ticked gently in the wall. Everything was normal, but her palms were wet. She looked at the photograph from the envelope. It had been taken at night. In the center was an old yellow taxi parked beside a narrow road. Behind it, half hidden among black trees, stood a white house. The house had a steep roof, a small front porch, and 2 dark upstairs windows. In one of those windows, a figure was standing and looking down. Lynn turned the photo over. On the back, someone had written, October 12, 1998. There was no house there. 2 days later, Lynn decided to produce the Bachelor's Grove episode anyway. Not because she was unafraid, because she needed to know what her father had seen. Her partner for the field recording was Mark Ellis, a 40-year-old freelance videographer who specialized in urban legends and abandoned places. Mark was tall, thin, dryly funny, and wore a gray knit cap even when it was not cold. He did not believe in ghosts, but he loved haunted locations because, as he liked to say, ghosts never ask for image rights. They left Chicago at 3 in the afternoon. The sky was heavy and gray. Clouds hung low like smoke. The maple leaves along the road had turned deep red. But as the car approached Rubio Woods, the color seemed to drain from the world. The trees became black shapes. The grass near the road was damp and flattened like wet hair. Mark drove. Lynn sat in the passenger seat with her recorder on her lap. "You okay?" Mark asked. "I'm fine." "You're staring at that recorder like it's about to bite you." Lynn did not smile. "My father came here once." Mark glanced at her. "He saw something?" "Maybe." They parked near the trail that led toward the cemetery. Before leaving the car, Lynn checked her gear. Main recorder, lavalier microphone, spare batteries, phone, flashlight, notebook. Mark carried a camera, a compact tripod, an infrared camera, and a backup audio recorder. As soon as they stepped out, an older man appeared from the trail. He wore a brown jacket, an old baseball cap, and carried a walking stick. His face was lined, but his eyes were sharp. He introduced himself as Eddie Kane, a retired Forest Preserve maintenance worker who had agreed to be interviewed for the episode. "You two got here later than I expected," Eddie said. Mark checked his watch. "It's only 4:10. Eddie looked up at the sky. "Around here, 4:10 in the fall is late." Lynn turned on the recorder. "Have you ever seen anything out here yourself?" she asked. Eddie did not answer right away. He looked down at the dirt trail covered in leaves. "I have seen enough that I stopped trying to prove anything." "You mean the ghost car?" Mark asked. "The car," Eddie said. "The house, the lights, the woman, the sound of a baby crying. Some people see one thing. Some people see more. The unlucky ones see what is looking for them." Lynn asked, "Where does the house appear?" Eddie pointed his stick toward the trees. "It does not keep to one place. Sometimes near the tree line. Sometimes behind the cemetery fence. Sometimes right beside the old road. It does not stand still. It lets people believe they can reach it." "And then?" Mark asked. Eddie looked at him. "And then they try." No one spoke for a few seconds. Wind moved through the woods, carrying the smell of dead leaves and cold soil. Then Eddie turned to Lynn. "You are Kwong's daughter?" Lynn froze. "You knew my father?" "I knew his taxi." A chill moved up Lynn's spine. "My father came here in 1998? Eddie nodded. "He came, but he did not enter by this trail." "Then how did he enter?" Eddie looked deeper into the woods. He followed the car. Bachelor's Grove Cemetery was smaller than Lynn expected. It did not look grand like the old cemeteries in horror movies. There was no huge iron gate, no ruined chapel, no angel statue towering over the stones. It was only a fenced patch of land in the woods, with low headstones, many cracked, many tilted, many so worn that the names could no longer be read. A few graves had faded plastic flowers. In some places, only flat stone bases pushed through the grass. But that smallness made it worse. It felt like a secret that had been forgotten for too long. Lynn stood near the fence and lifted her microphone. "We are standing at Bachelor's Grove Cemetery," she said. Her voice came back to her through the headphones, dry and close. A small cemetery hidden in Rubio Woods, famous for stories of a ghost car, strange lights, a vanishing house, and a woman in white. When she said the words "woman in white," the recorder crackled. Mark raised his head from the camera screen. "Did you hear that?" "Hear what?" "A baby." Eddie turned immediately. "Do not answer." Mark frowned. "I didn't say anything. I was not talking about me," Eddie said. If you hear a baby calling out here, do not answer. Lynn felt a sharp irritation. She did not like the way Eddie spoke. It was not the cheap confidence of someone trying to scare tourists. He spoke like a man who had made a mistake once and did not want to watch someone else repeat it. They began filming. Mark set the camera near the entrance and slowly panned across the stones. Lynn recorded her introduction. Eddie talked about the area's early families, the old road, and the years when the cemetery was neglected and became a challenge spot for teenagers trying to prove they were not afraid. As Eddie spoke, Lynn noticed a small grave marker partly hidden behind tall grass. The name was unreadable. Beside it lay a child's toy, a little metal rattle, old, darkened by rain and time. Lynn stepped closer. The moment she leaned down, a lullaby came softly through her headphones. It was not the wind. It was not Mark. It was a woman singing to a child. The melody was slow and sad, repeating the same 3 notes again and again. Lynn stood up quickly. Mark! Mark was filming near the fence. What? Are you playing music? No. Eddie came over with his walking stick. When he saw the rattle, his expression changed. Do not touch it. Why? There are things left here as apologies. Apologies to who? He looked at her. To the ones without names. Lynn looked down at the rattle. For 1 second, the dark metal reflected something behind her. Not trees, not Mark, a white house. She turned around. There was nothing but woods. At 5:17 p.m., the light began to die very fast. Eddie said they should leave. Mark wanted one final shot on the old Midlothian Turnpike. He said if they made an episode about Bachelor's Grove without footage of the haunted road, the audience would complain. Eddie objected. That road is not for cars anymore. Mark smiled. We're walking. Eddie looked at him for a long time. The problem is not what you are walking on. The problem is that something out there still thinks the road is open. In the end, he led them anyway. The old road lay deeper in the woods. It was a long strip of earth covered in rotting leaves, with bare trees pressing in from both sides. In some places, traces of the old surface remained. In others, nature had swallowed it completely. When Lynn stepped onto it, she had the strange feeling of entering a place that did not fully belong to the present. Her phone lost signal. The recorder kept running. Mark filmed from behind, his camera light moving over the tree trunks. This is good, he said. Very atmospheric. Eddie stopped. Quiet. Everyone froze. First, Lynn heard nothing. Then, far away, an engine started to growl. A deep, heavy, steady sound. Not a modern engine. An older one, as if it belonged to another decade. Mark lowered the camera. There's still a road back there? Eddie did not answer. Between the trees ahead, 2 dim yellow lights appeared. Headlights. They moved slowly toward them. Mark took 1 step back. No way. The lights came closer. Lynn could hear tires grinding over old pavement, the body of the car trembling, the engine coughing like an old animal. Then the car emerged. A black vintage sedan. Long body, high roof, decades out of date. The windshield was dark. There was no driver visible, no license plate. Came straight toward them. Mark grabbed Lynn and pulled her aside. The car glided past, ice cold, without wind, without disturbing a single leaf. As it passed, Lynn looked into the back seat. A woman in a white dress sat there. In her arms was a baby wrapped in cloth. The woman turned her face toward Lynn. Her mouth moved. No sound came through the air. But inside Lynn's headphones, the words were clear. Did you bring it home? The car rolled 10 more yards and disappeared. It did not turn. It did not dim its lights. It vanished as if darkness had swallowed it whole. Mark stood frozen. His camera was still recording. Eddie's breathing had become ragged. "We leave now," he said, but Lynn did not move. She looked down at the recorder. The counter was still running. 5:17, 5:18, 5:19. Then it jumped backward. Midnight. A voice came from the recorder's small speaker. Not Lynn's voice, not Mark's. Her father's. "I told you not to follow the car." The woods went silent. Then, to the left of the old road, between the black tree trunks, a window lit up. A white house stood there. The house could not be real. Lynn knew that the moment she saw it. It stood in a clearing about 50 yards from the road. A 2-story wooden house, white paint peeling, steep roof, narrow front porch with 2 rocking chairs. One downstairs window glowed with warm yellow light. A thin ribbon of smoke rose from the chimney. The smell of fresh-baked bread drifted through the air. It was warm, gentle, and so completely out of place that it became terrifying. Mark raised the camera. "Jesus!" Eddie grabbed his arm. "Do not film it. Do not walk toward it." Mark pulled away. "Do you understand what we are seeing? This is evidence." "No," Eddie said, his voice trembling. "This is bait." Lynn stared at the house. The front door was cracked open. From inside came the sound of an old radio, hissing and fading. A man's voice spoke in distorted English. "Tonight, on the Chicago Night Files." Lynn stopped breathing. It was the opening voice of the podcast she worked for. But this episode had not been produced yet. No one had recorded that line. No one had even seen the final script. The radio continued. "We follow audio producer Lynn Tran into Bachelor's Grove, where some roads do not lead out." Mark lowered the camera. "Lynn." The door opened a little wider. A woman's voice spoke from inside, very softly. "Kwong." Lynn's body went cold. That was her father's name. Eddie stepped back. "Do not answer." But Lynn had already stepped off the road. "My father went in there," she said. Eddie shook his head. "No, your father came out of there. Those are 2 different things." Lynn kept walking. Mark cursed under his breath and followed her. Eddie stayed on the old road, desperate. "If you go in, do not hold anything. Do not eat. Do not sit. Do not look into mirrors. And if you see someone you know..." He stopped. "If you see someone you know, remember that they may be able to see you too." Lynn stepped onto the porch. The wood creaked under her foot. The rocking chair on the left moved by itself, though there was no wind. She pushed open the door. Inside, the house was warmer than the woods. Too warm. The front room was small, with old floral wallpaper, a coal fire in the hearth, and a dining table set with 3 plates. Black and white photographs hung on the walls. There was no dust, no cobwebs. Everything was clean, as if someone had just finished preparing the room. Mark entered behind her, still filming. "1 minute," he whispered. "We film 1 minute, then we go." Lynn did not answer. She was looking at the radio on the shelf. It was an old wooden radio with brass knobs. From the speaker came the sound of a cassette tape. Her father's voice. "That night, I did not take her to the cemetery. I drove her away from it." Lynn moved closer. Her father's voice sharpened through the static. She sat in the back seat. She did not look at me. The baby in her arms did not cry. I asked her where home was. She pointed through the windshield. "And in the woods, I saw this house." Mark looked at Lynn. Is this the tape you told me about? Lynn nodded, her throat dry. But I never played this part. The radio hissed louder. Her father continued. I stopped the taxi in front of the porch. She got out. But when I looked into the rearview mirror, the woman and the baby were not in the back seat anymore. The silence. It was me, older, wearing the suit they buried me in. Lynn stepped back. The fire went out at once. The house sank into weak yellow light. The photographs on the wall began to change. At first, they showed unfamiliar families. Then one photograph became Mark, standing in the same room but much older. Another became Eddie, younger, wearing a Forest Preserve uniform beside a patrol vehicle. The last photograph became Lynn's father. He wore a white shirt and black slacks and stood in front of his yellow taxi. Beside him stood the woman in white. She was not holding a baby. She was holding a metal rattle. Mark whispered, "We need to get out." From upstairs came the sound of footsteps. Slow. One step, then another. The stairs groaned. Lynn turned toward the door. The front door was shut. Mark ran to it and pulled the handle. It would not open. He pounded on the wood. "Eddie!" No answer came. Only the radio. Her father's voice became closer, as if he stood behind her. "Lynn, I took something that did not belong to me." She looked around. "Dad, when I was young, I came here with friends to prove we were not afraid. We drank. We laughed. We broke headstones. One of the boys found the rattle beside a child's grave." Lynn closed her eyes. She understood. "You took it. I did not take it." His voice shook. "But I did not stop him." The footsteps on the stairs stopped at the landing. A white shape appeared above them. Mark stopped breathing. The woman stood there. She did not look like a ghost from a movie. She was not torn apart. There was no blood, no monstrous distortion. She was simply pale, quiet, and so sad that it made Lynn want to look away. The woman's eyes fixed on her. "Did you bring it home?" she asked. Lynn's voice trembled. "The rattle." The woman did not answer. Mark whispered, "It is outside at the cemetery. We did not bring it." The woman turned to Mark. In that moment, his face lost all color. He saw something Lynn could not see. He backed up, hit the dining table, and knocked one plate to the floor. It shattered. The house shook. From inside the walls came dozens of whispers. Not one voice. Many. Men, women, old, young. All saying the same thing. "Return the road home." The lights flickered. The windows went black, as if there was no longer a forest outside, only a thick, empty darkness. Lynn looked around in panic. On the dining table, between the 3 plates, sat a small object. A car key, old, rusted, with a metal tag marked 312. Lynn recognized it. It was her father's taxi key. Her mother had kept it in a drawer for years. After the funeral, it disappeared. Lynn picked it up. Every sound stopped. Mark stared at her in horror. Eddie said not to hold anything. Too late. Behind them, the stairs thundered with footsteps. Not one person coming down. Many. Lynn gripped the key and ran to the door. This time it opened. Not onto the porch, onto the old road. The black sedan was parked beneath the trees, its yellow headlights burning. The rear door was open. Inside, Lynn saw her father. Kwong sat in the back seat, wearing the same jacket he had worn on the last day of his life. His face was calm, but his eyes were wet. "Dad!" Lynn cried. He shook his head. "Do not get in the car." The woman in white stood behind Lynn. "He promised," she said. Lynn turned. "Promised what?" To take us home. Her father closed his eyes. I thought if I returned the rattle, it would end. But I returned the wrong thing. Then what does she want? He looked at Lynn for a long time. Not an object. The woman stepped closer. We did not lose the rattle, she said. We lost the road. The woods began to change. The trees faded. The ground became mud. Far away, old houses appeared in the dusk, with lamplight in their windows. Lynn heard a horse-drawn wagon, children laughing, people calling to one another in an older world. She saw Bachelor's Grove not as a ruined cemetery, but as a small living settlement, with chimney smoke and opening doors and people moving through the evening as if they had never died. Then the vision tore open. Modern headlights flashed. Teenagers laughed. Glass bottles shattered. A headstone cracked. A young man, her father's voice, much younger, shouted, "Run!" A car swerved on the old road. A woman holding a child stood in the headlights. Brakes screamed. Then darkness. Lynn covered her mouth. No! Her father spoke from inside the car. I did not kill them, but I ran. We all ran. We did not report it. We did not go back. We told ourselves she had been some disturbed woman in the woods. The woman in white looked at Lynn. By morning, no one found bodies. No one believed there had been an accident. No names, no record, no house, only a ghost story. Mark stood beside Lynn, ashen. So the house. The last place we remembered being alive, the woman said. And the car. She looked at the black sedan. The last thing we saw. Lynn understood. Bachelor's Grove was not haunted only by the dead. It was haunted by something that had never been admitted. An accident with no record. A family with no names. A road removed from maps, but never truly gone. Lynn held her father's taxi key. What do you want me to do? The woman looked at the recorder in Lynn's hand. Tell it correctly. They escaped the house after full darkness, or perhaps the house allowed them to leave. Lynn, Mark, and Eddie found each other again on the dirt path near the cemetery. Eddie was sitting at the base of a tree, gray-faced and shaking. He said they had been gone for 7 minutes. Mark checked his camera. The memory card contained more than 2 hours. No one spoke on the way back to the car. Lynn kept her father's taxi key in her coat pocket. It felt cold, as if it had been pulled from ice water. Before leaving, she looked back at the cemetery. Inside the fence, beside the small nameless grave, the rattle was still there. But now a white flower lay beside it, fresh, as if someone had just placed it down. 3 days later, Lynn edited the podcast episode. She added no sound effects, no music bed. She did not remove the static. She did not trim the silences. She left everything exactly as it was. The car on the old road, the radio inside the house, her father's voice, the woman asking that question. Mark sent her all the footage, but most of the house footage was corrupted. The scenes inside appeared only as frames of white glare. One shot, however, was clear, the wall covered with photographs. Among those photographs, Lynn recognized many faces. People whose disappearances had been mentioned for years on ghost hunting forums. A couple who got lost in 1979 and were later found at the edge of the woods with no memory of what had happened. A group of students who took challenge photos in 1986. A man in a forest preserve uniform, her father, and in the lower corner of the frame, there was an empty space. A picture frame with no face in it yet. Lynn zoomed in. Below the frame was a small label. The writing was blurred, but she could still read it. Lynn Tran, Audio recorded, not yet returned. She turned off the monitor. That night, Lynn uploaded the episode under the title, Bachelor's Grove, The Road That Still Remembers. The episode spread fast. Listeners argued over it. Some called it brilliant audio fiction. Some called it a hoax. Some analyzed the waveform, isolated voices, measured frequencies, and searched for edits. A few insisted her father's voice was fake. Others said the engine in the recording did not match any modern vehicle. But the part people noticed most was the ending. At 29 minutes and 57 seconds, after Lynn's final narration, there was a 3-second silence. Then a woman's voice whispered, "Thank you for telling it correctly." After that came the sound of a car door opening. Then the episode ended. Lynn had not added that part. She was certain. When she exported the final file, the runtime was only 29 minutes and 57 seconds. But after it went online, the episode length changed by itself. Exactly 30 minutes. Not a second more, not a second less. 30 minutes. The next morning, Mark called Lynn. She did not answer. He texted her. No reply. He went to her apartment. The door was unlocked. Inside, her computer was still on. The audio software was open. On the desk were her headphones, notebook, the old envelope, and her father's taxi key. But Lynn was gone. Break time equals 1:0s/. Mark searched the apartment. No sign of a struggle. No open window. Nothing stolen. Only one thing was strange. On the floor beside her desk were several dry leaves. Deep red maple leaves. And a trail of mud leading from the desk to the door. Mark called the police. They filed a missing person report. They asked when he had last seen her. He told the truth, that they had gone to Bachelor's Grove, that they had seen a car, that they had entered a house that did not exist. No one believed him. 1 week later, the podcast episode was removed from the platform for an unspecified violation. But before it disappeared, thousands of people had downloaded it. After that, a strange phenomenon began to spread. Anyone who listened to the episode alone after midnight claimed to hear an extra section that was not in the original file. It was very short. First came the sound of an old engine. Then tires rolling over dirt. Then Lynn's voice, calm, very close, as if she were sitting in the back seat. If you are hearing this, the road has remembered your voice. A silence. Do not look out the window. Most people stopped listening there, but some did not. They said that if you kept listening, you would hear a woman ask, "Can you see my house?" And if you looked out the window at that moment, no matter where you were, Chicago, California, Hanoi, a 10th floor apartment, a rented room with no yard, a hotel in a city you did not know, you would see, on the other side of the glass, a white house standing in the dark, a front porch, 2 upstairs windows, warm yellow light in the front room, and in front of the porch, a black sedan waiting, its rear door open. People say Lynn Tran was never found, but Mark knew the truth was not that simple. 3 months later, he received a package with no return address. Inside was Lynn's audio recorder. It was crusted with dry mud. The battery was dead. The memory card was still inside. Mark plugged it into his computer. There was only one file. The file name was returned.wave. He opened it. At first, there was only static. Then Lynn's voice came through. "Mark, if you are hearing this file, do not look for me." She sounded tired, but not terrified. "I understand now. The house does not take people for no reason. It only holds those who still owe a story. A sound came through the recording, like a wooden door closing. The woman in white is not looking for her child. That is only what the living tell themselves because it is easier to understand. She is looking for someone who still remembers the way home. Mark swallowed hard. In the recording, Lynn breathed in slowly. And I promised I would help her. A silence. Then an engine started. Lynn spoke one final sentence. The next time you see the black car, do not run. Look carefully at the driver's seat. Mark jumped out of his chair. Outside his apartment, down in the parking lot, a car horn sounded. An old horn. Low, cracked, and long. He walked to the window. Below, between the modern cars, a black sedan was parked. Its yellow headlights shone up toward his apartment. In the back seat sat the woman in white. In her arms was the baby, and in the driver's seat was Lynn. She wore the same coat she had worn on the day she disappeared. Her hair fell over her shoulders. Both hands rested on the steering wheel. She lifted her face toward Mark and smiled. It was not a smile asking for help. It was not the smile of someone trapped. It was the smile of someone who finally understood where she had to go. Mark stepped back from the window. His phone vibrated. A new message. From Lynn's number. Only one sentence. It is your turn to tell it correctly. Outside, the car kept idling. It did not move forward. It did not leave. It only waited. Because at Bachelor's Grove, not every ghost wants to frighten the living. Some ghosts only want their story told. Completely, truthfully. And if the living keep turning them into legends, the old road will keep opening. The White House will keep appearing. The black car will keep stopping in front of those who have heard the invitation. And somewhere inside Rubio Woods, among leaning stones and trees that no longer remember spring, Bachelor's Grove Cemetery will remain like a wound that never fully closes. By day, it is only a small cemetery forgotten by time. But after dark, if you hear an old engine at the end of the road, if you see two yellow headlights cutting through the trees, if you see a white house standing where no house can possibly be, do not walk toward it. Do not call anyone inside. Do not ask for directions, because what appears in front of you may not be coming from the past. It may be coming from the story you have not told yet. And once the car stops, it will not disappear until someone takes the driver's seat. If this story made you hesitate before looking out your own window tonight, do not keep that feeling to yourself. Leave a comment below and tell me. If you saw that white house standing where no house should be, would you step closer or would you run? And if you have ever heard a local legend about a road, a cemetery, a vanishing house, or a ghost car that people in your town still whisper about, share it in the comments. Your story might become part of a future episode. Subscribe to the channel for more true location horror stories, urban legends, and mysteries that may not be finished with us yet. Because sometimes, the scariest places are not the ones that disappear. They are the ones that keep waiting for someone to tell the truth. Before you drive down Archer Avenue after midnight, there is one story every local thinks they already know. A girl in a white dress stands in the rain near Resurrection Cemetery. She asks for a ride home. She sits quietly in the back seat. Then, just as the cemetery gates appear, she disappears. Most people call her a legend. But Daniel Tran learned that some legends are not trying to scare you. They are trying to make you stop. Resurrection Catholic Cemetery is located at 7201 Archer Road in Justice, Illinois. Consecrated in 1904, it spans approximately 397 acres and is the final resting place for over 225,000 people, according to Catholic Cemeteries Chicago. The most famous legend here is that of Resurrection Mary, a young woman dressed in white who is often said to appear on Archer Avenue, hitch a ride, and then vanish near Resurrection Cemetery. Nobody in Chicago is truly afraid of winter. They are used to it. They are used to wind that cuts across the face like a dull blade. They are used to thin ice shining on the asphalt under yellow streetlights. They are used to leaving home before sunrise and coming back after the city has gone quiet, as if some enormous machine has finally powered down. But people who live on the southwest side of Chicago know a different kind of fear. Not snow. Not black ice. Not the distant scream of an ambulance cutting through the night. A road. Archer Avenue. Especially the stretch that runs through Justice, Illinois, near Resurrection Cemetery. People say that if you drive that road too late at night, you may see a girl standing on the shoulder. A white dress. Pale blonde hair. A thin shawl around her shoulders. Shoes that look as if they were meant for an old dance hall, not a lonely road in the rain. She does not wave her arms. She does not scream. She does not look lost in the ordinary way. She simply waits, watching each passing car as though she has been waiting for a very long time. If you stop, she will ask for a ride. If you ask where she wants to go, she will answer in a soft voice. Please take me home. And when your car reaches the gates of Resurrection Cemetery, she will vanish from the back seat. People have told that story for decades. They call her Resurrection Mary. Before that night, I thought she was just something old men talked about in bars when the weather was bad and the lights were low. Then I became the man who opened his car door for her. My name is Daniel Tran. I am 36 years old, and I drive nights. It is not the life I imagined, but it is the life that keeps the bills from swallowing me whole. During the day, I work in the warehouse of a small pharmacy in Bridgeport. At night, I drive for an app. Every evening, I tell myself I will take only 3 more rides and then go home. Then I look at rent, my mother's medication, and my daughter's school expenses, and I tap accept one more time. Life gives you plenty of reasons not to believe in ghosts. The living can exhaust you enough. That Friday night, cold rain had been falling since late afternoon. Not a hard rain, the worst kind. A thin, patient rain that seems harmless until it soaks through your collar, your sleeves, and finally your bones. A little after 11:30, I dropped off a drunk passenger in front of a bar in Summit. I was about to log off when my phone buzzed. New ride request. Pickup, near Archer Avenue. Destination, Justice. The pay was good. I looked at the map for a few seconds. The route would take me past Resurrection Cemetery. For no good reason, I hesitated. A childhood memory rose out of nowhere. I was 10 years old, sitting in the back of my father's taxi while he smoked by the curb. He had told me, after midnight, don't drive Archer unless you have to. I asked him why. He looked at me through the cigarette smoke and said, Some people ask for rides because they want to go somewhere. Others ask because they want to see who will stop. At 10, I thought my father was just drunk and talking nonsense. For years, I still thought that. Then came the night that changed everything. I accepted the ride. 12 minutes later, I turned onto a narrow road where the streetlights thinned and the trees bent over the pavement in the rain. My windshield wipers moved back and forth with a slow, steady rhythm, like the breathing of someone asleep. The pickup point was near an empty lot. No open stores, no lit houses, no person waiting under a sign. I slowed down. Nobody was there. I was about to call the passenger when the app displayed a message. Passenger has arrived. I frowned and looked around again. Then someone knocked on the rear window. My heart jerked in my chest. A young woman stood beside the car. I had no idea where she had come from. She wore an old-fashioned white dress that fell to her calves. A cream-colored shawl lay across her shoulders, wet with rain. Her pale blonde hair clung to both sides of her face. One hand held a small purse against her chest. The other rested gently on the glass. She did not look like someone coming home from a party. She looked like someone who had stepped out of an old photograph. I lowered the window a few inches. "Did you call a ride?" I asked. She leaned down and looked at me. Her eyes were pale blue. Beautiful. And empty. "Can you take me home?" she asked. Her voice was soft and hoarse, as if it had traveled through wet cloth. I glanced at the app. The passenger name showed only one letter. "Sure," I said. "Get in. It's freezing out there." She opened the rear door. Cold air rushed into the car. Not normal cold. Not winter rain cold. It felt like the breath from a room sealed shut for many years. She sat behind the passenger seat, perfectly upright, knees together, hands resting on the little purse. I looked at her in the rearview mirror. "You want the address in the app, right?" She did not answer at once. Her eyes stayed on the dark road ahead. After a long moment, she said, "Just keep driving on Archer." I forced a polite smile. "The app says Justice." More specifically, I looked down at the screen. The destination had changed. It no longer showed a house. It showed an address. 7201 Archer Road. Resurrection Cemetery. I swallowed. I tried to laugh it off. "You're going to a cemetery at this hour?" The girl did not look at me. "No," she said. "I'm going home." The car went quiet. I thought about asking another question, but I had learned something from years of driving strangers at night. You do not ask too much. Some passengers get into your car after a fight. Some after a 12-hour shift. Some only want a place to cry where no one knows their name. And sometimes a girl in a white dress gets into your car and asks to go to a cemetery. Better to drive. So I drove. Archer Avenue stretched ahead of us, wet and shining under dim lamps. The rain tapped at the windows. The trees along the road looked skeletal when my headlights swept over them, their branches reaching out like thin arms. I kept glancing at her in the mirror. She sat perfectly still. No phone. No shiver. No white breath in the cold air, though the temperature inside the car had dropped so far that my fingers ached around the wheel. "Were you at a party?" I asked. She slowly turned her head. "What?" "Your dress. It looks like something for a dance." She looked down at the white fabric as if she had only just remembered wearing it. "Yes," she said. I was dancing. Where? A long silence followed. Then she said, Oh, Henry. My hands tightened on the wheel. I knew the name. Not because I had ever been there, because anyone who grew up near Chicago long enough had heard about the old dance hall on Archer Avenue. Some called it the O. Henry Ballroom. Some called it Willowbrook Ballroom. And in the Resurrection Mary legend, it was the place where a girl in a white dress had danced before dying on her way home. I told myself it was a coincidence. Maybe she liked vintage clothes. Maybe she was an actress. Maybe she was messing with me. Before I could ask anything else, she spoke again. Do you believe a person can get lost on the same road for almost a century? I looked at her in the mirror. What do you mean? Some roads don't take people anywhere, she said. They only bring them back to the moment they want to forget. I turned the heat higher. Warm air blasted through the vents, but the cold from the back seat kept crawling up my neck. Then my phone lost service. The map froze. The location arrow sat pinned to Archer Avenue like a nail driven into glass. Just then, the girl asked, Do you have a daughter? I flinched. Yes. How old is she? 11. What's her name? I did not want to answer. Somehow I did. Lily. The girl gave the faintest smile. You should go home to her early tonight. A chill moved through me. Do you know me? She turned her face toward the mirror. For the first time I saw her clearly. Her skin was bloodless. Her lips were blue from cold. Beneath her wet hair, at her right temple, a dark mark ran down her neck. It looked like dried blood. I blinked. The mark was gone. She was only a sad, pale young woman in the back seat again. No, she said. But the people who stop for me usually have something they have not said to someone they love. I slammed the brakes. The car slid on the wet pavement. Who are you? I demanded. She faced forward. You're almost there. Ahead of us, the gates of Resurrection Cemetery appeared through the rain. Black iron gates. A long fence stretching into darkness on both sides. Behind it, rows of headstones faded in the rain, low crosses and gray shapes rising out of the grass. Farther back, the mausoleum stood like a heavy shadow. I pulled to the shoulder. My headlights struck the gates. We're here, I said. No answer. I turned around. The back seat was empty. The door was still locked. The seat belt had never been pulled. There were no wet footprints, no little purse, no girl in a white dress. Only a small patch of rainwater on the seat, so cold that when I touched it, my fingertips went numb as if I had pressed them against ice. Then I saw the rear window. Fog had gathered on the glass, forming words. Not written by a finger. It looked breathed from the outside in. Don't let him drive tonight. I sat frozen. A second later, my phone regained service. The app chimed. Trip completed. The payment had gone through. The passenger name was no longer M. It had changed to Mary. I did not sleep that night. When I got home, I sat in the parking lot for almost an hour with my hands still shaking. I tried to explain everything. Maybe she had opened the door and jumped out when I wasn't looking. Impossible. The child lock was still on. Maybe the app glitched. Maybe the message on the glass was a prank. Maybe I was exhausted. Maybe I had dozed off for a few seconds and dreamed the whole thing. The next morning, I took the car to be washed. The worker called me over. Man, your back seat smells strange. What kind of strange? He wrinkled his nose. Old flowers. Like a funeral home. That night I decided not to drive. But the more I tried to ignore her, the more I thought about her. I searched the name online. Resurrection Mary. Hundreds of results appeared. A girl in white, blonde hair, a ride request, a disappearance near Resurrection Cemetery. Some said she had died after leaving a dance. Some said she was struck by a car on Archer Avenue. Some named her Mary Bregovy. Others said Anna Norcus or Maria. No one knew for sure. But everyone agreed on the same shape of the story. Since the 1930s, people claimed they had picked her up. Others claimed they saw her cross the road. Some swore they hit her with their cars, only to step outside and find no body. I read about the handprints once reported on the cemetery fence. Then I closed the laptop. Folklore was one thing. Folklore did not know my daughter's name. The next evening, my mother called. Her voice sounded weaker than usual. "Daniel, are you driving tonight?" I paused. "Probably. Why?" A silence came through the phone. Then she asked, "Will you be on Archer?" I sat up. "Why are you asking me that?" "Answer me." "Maybe, if I get a ride there." My mother's breathing changed. "Don't go." "What do you know about Archer?" She stayed quiet for so long that I could hear the clock ticking on her kitchen wall. Finally, she said, "Your father once picked up a girl there." My throat tightened. "Dad." "A long time ago, before you were born. He told you?" "Not all of it, but after that night, he was never the same man." I sat on the edge of my bed. My father had died 8 years earlier from a stroke. Bao Tran had been a taxi driver most of his life, then a night security guard. He was quiet, sad-eyed, and easily startled by the sound of tires screeching outside. When I was a kid, I thought he was strict. When I grew up, I thought he had too many fears. Now I wondered whether he had only one. "Mom," I said, "what did he see?" She answered in a whisper. "He said the girl was not asking for a ride home." "What did she want?" My mother's voice broke. "She wanted the driver to remember." "Remember what?" She did not answer. She only said, "If you see her again, don't ask who she is." "Why?" "Because she will ask you the same question." Then she hung up. I did not want to be involved in this. I truly did not. I had rent to pay, a daughter I saw on weekends, and a mother with a weak heart living alone. I did not have time to hunt ghosts. I did not want to become a weird story on the internet. But life does not let go of people who have been chosen. 3 nights later, I was finishing a ride in Oaklawn when the app turned itself on. I had not accepted anything. The screen showed a pickup point. Archer Avenue. Passenger name, Mary. I pulled into a gas station, closed the app, and shut off the car. The screen stayed lit. Passenger waiting. I held the phone's power button. It would not turn off. Outside, the gas station lights began to flicker. From a speaker mounted on a pump, old music crackled into the air. A slow dance tune, thin and warped, like it was playing from a radio built before my father was born. I looked up. Across the street, under a yellow light, the girl in the white dress stood watching me. No wave, no step toward me, just stillness. I opened my car door and shouted, "What do you want?" She tilted her head. Then she raised one hand and pointed behind me. I turned. A pickup truck was barreling into the gas station. The driver had collapsed over the wheel. I jumped out seconds before the truck slammed into the rear of my car and shoved it sideways into the next pump. Metal screamed. Glass burst. I hit the wet concrete hard. If I had still been in the driver's seat, I would have died. People ran out of the store. The pickup driver had suffered a heart attack, but he lived. So did I. When police asked why I had left my car at the exact right second, I did not know what to say. I looked across the street. The girl was gone. Only one small female footprint remained on the wet pavement, pointing toward Archer Avenue. That night, I did not go home. I drove my damaged car to my mother's apartment. She opened the door, saw my face, and said nothing. On the kitchen table, she had placed an old tin box. I recognized it. My father's cigarette tin. My mother sat down and folded her hands together. It is time you knew. I looked at the box. What did you hide in there? I didn't hide it. Your father made me promise. Promise what? That if you never saw that girl, I would never tell you. I opened the tin. Inside were several old photographs, a yellowed newspaper clipping, a tarnished taxi key, and a folded piece of paper. I picked up the clipping. It was not about Resurrection Mary. It was about an accident. 1987. A taxi driver on Archer Avenue claimed he had struck a girl in a white dress. But when police arrived, there was no body. The driver's name was Bao Tran. My father. My hands went cold. Dad hit her? My mother shook her head. He thought he did. After that night, she began appearing to him. Not once. Many times. Why? My mother looked down at one of the photographs. It showed my father as a young man beside an old yellow taxi. Next to him stood an older American man in a long coat, his face partly washed out by sunlight. She pointed to him. Because your father was not alone that night. Who is he? Harold Whitman, your father's taxi company boss. I had never heard the name. Was he rich? Rich, connected, protected by lawyers. She closed her eyes. That night Harold was drunk. But he did not want anyone to know. He made your father drive him home, then forced him to switch seats with him near Archer. Later, the report listed your father because the taxi belonged to the company. Harold disappeared from the story. So Dad was forced to take the blame? It was worse than that. Her voice trembled. Your father said they truly hit someone that night. The room seemed to tilt. But the article said there was no body. Because the person they hit was not the girl in white. Silence filled the kitchen. Outside the window, wind whistled through the frame. My mother continued. After the car struck something, Harold dragged your father out to look. They found a young woman lying beside the road. She was not wearing white. She wore a red coat, and she was still breathing. What happened? I asked, though I already knew I did not want the answer. Harold did not call for help. I could barely speak. Mom! He said if they called police, both of them would go to prison. He told your father no one would believe an immigrant taxi driver. He said the girl was already dead. Then he forced your father to help drag her past the trees near the cemetery. Dad did that. Tears fell from my mother's eyes. Your father was a coward that night, and he carried that cowardice until the day he died. I stood up. No, Dad wouldn't have. Every night, he heard someone knocking. My mother said, not Mary. The girl in the red coat. Old memories came back to me with a new shape. My father sitting on the balcony until dawn, his hands shaking around a glass of water. His sudden jolts awake in the middle of the night, whispering in Vietnamese, stop knocking. I hear you. I had thought those were nightmares. They were confessions. What was her name? I asked. My mother unfolded the yellowed paper. A name was written by hand. Eleanor Blake. Below it was an old address in Willow Springs. Your father found out later, she said. Eleanor went missing that same night. 22 years old. A new elementary school teacher. Her family searched for years. I stared at the name. What does Mary have to do with it? My mother wiped her face. Your father said that after they dragged Eleanor toward the trees, a girl in a white dress stood across the road watching them. She said nothing. She only watched. Harold thought she was alive and ran after her. She vanished in front of the cemetery gate. Mary had seen everything, and after that, she never let my father forget. I drove to Archer Avenue the next morning. Not at night. I was not brave enough for that. My car was being repaired after the crash, so I borrowed a friend's. I drove slowly past the gates of Resurrection Cemetery, past the empty stretches of road, past the trees that lined the shoulder. In daylight, the place did not look like a legend. The cemetery was wide, quiet, and clean. People came to visit graves, leave flowers, pray, and drive away. Cars passed. The winter light was pale but honest. There was no white dress, no ghost. Only a heaviness I could not name, as if too many untold stories were lying under that peaceful ground. I went to the local library and asked for newspaper records from 1987. The librarian was an older woman named Margaret. When I said the name Eleanor Blake, her hands stopped moving. "Are you family?" she asked. "No, I'm looking into an old case." She studied me for longer than she needed to. "Old things around Archer don't stay quiet," she said. "I need to know what happened to her." Margaret led me to the microfilm reader and helped me search through old reports. Eleanor Blake. Missing on November 14, 1987. Last seen leaving a fundraiser at a small hall near Willow Springs. Her car had broken down earlier that day, and she planned to call a taxi home because of the rain. No one ever saw her again. A week later, her family put her photograph all over Archer Avenue. A month later, the case went cold. A year later, her mother died. No body. No grave. No goodbye. I read until my eyes burned. Margaret stood behind me and said, her family thought she had been kidnapped, but her father didn't. He always said Eleanor was still somewhere near Resurrection. Why? Because the night she disappeared, a man called their house. He never gave his name. He only cried and said he was sorry. I knew who the caller was. My father. Margaret placed a photocopied photograph on the table. This is Eleanor. I looked down. A young woman with brown hair smiled in front of an elementary school classroom. She did not look like Mary. No white dress. No cold beauty. No mystery. Just an ordinary young woman who had gotten into the wrong taxi on a rainy night. I left the library at dusk. As I reached the parking lot, my phone buzzed. A text from an unknown number. No name. Only one line. Tonight he drives again. I called back. The number did not exist. I stood in the wind and stared at the message. My father was dead. If Harold Whitman was still alive, he had to be very old. I searched his name. Harold Whitman. Former taxi company owner. Later real estate investor. Still alive. 91 years old. Living in a private senior residence in Burr Ridge. A local society article said his family was holding a birthday dinner for him that weekend at a restaurant near Willow Springs. I looked at the date. Tonight. The restaurant was close to Archer Avenue. I did not know what I intended to do. Call the police and tell them a ghost named Mary had warned me that a man who covered up a crime 39 years ago was going to drive again? Tell them my dead father helped hide a missing woman? I had no proof. Only an old tin box, a handwritten name, and my mother's story. But there was one thing I had not checked. The taxi key. I went back to my mother and asked about it. She said that, after the accident, my father refused to drive that cab again. Harold had it moved to an old company storage building. Years later, when the company sold off its property, my father kept the key like a punishment he could hold in his hand. Does that storage place still exist? I asked. I don't know, she said, but your father may have written the address somewhere. We searched his old drawers and found a black notebook. The first pages were ordinary: gas costs, repairs, fares. The final pages were not. One sentence appeared over and over in my father's handwriting. I should have stopped him. On the last page, he had written an address: a deserted warehouse in Summit, not far from Archer Avenue. I arrived there at 8 that night. Rain was falling again. The warehouse stood behind a row of closed shops, its metal door rusted, its sign almost unreadable. I shined my flashlight through a crack. Darkness. I do not know why the key made me believe the taxi would still be there, but when I forced open a side door and stepped inside, I found it. An old yellow cab under a tarp. Dust lay over it like ash. I pulled the tarp away. The car emerged in my flashlight beam. The plate was faded. A crack ran across the windshield. The right side of the front bumper was crushed inward. Nearly 40 years had passed. It was still there. Like an old animal locked in a room with the sin of its owner. I opened the cab with my father's key. Inside, it smelled of rotted leather, stale gasoline, and the sweet sick smell of dead flowers. I checked the front seat. Nothing. The glove box, an old insurance card, receipts, a book of matches. Then I opened the trunk. My flashlight swept over the ruined lining. In one corner, under the mat, was a black plastic bag hardened by time. I pulled it out. Inside were a dark red scarf, a woman's shoe, and a small brown leather wallet. Not Mary's purse. This was Eleanor's. Inside were an old student ID, a few coins, and a classroom photograph. Name on the ID: Eleanor Blake. I sank down onto the warehouse floor. My whole body shook. This was proof, not only of the crash, of the cover-up. Why had Harold kept these things? To make sure no one found them? Or for some reason even worse? I tried to call 911. No signal. The warehouse lights flickered. Then I heard music. The same old dance tune came from inside the taxi. The radio, dead for decades, glowed with a faint green light. I stepped back. From the back seat, a woman's voice said, "You found her." I turned. Mary was sitting there. White dress, thin shawl, a face as sad as the first night I saw her. "Why me?" I asked. "Because your father stopped for me." "Did you want revenge on him?" "No," she said. "The dead don't need revenge. Only the living need the truth." "Why didn't you tell the police yourself?" A faint smile touched her mouth. "Do you think I never tried?" Outside, a car pulled up. Headlights shone through the cracked warehouse door. I shut off my flashlight and hid behind the taxi. The warehouse door opened. 2 men came in. One was middle-aged, wearing a dark suit. The other was very old, seated in a motorized wheelchair. Harold Whitman. Even at 91, I recognized him from the old photograph. Thin skin, deep-set eyes, a face folded in on itself but still cruelly awake. The man in the suit said, "Are you sure you want to see it tonight?" Harold wheezed. "Once a year. Your family is waiting at the restaurant. Let them wait." The man pushed Harold closer to the old taxi. I held my breath. Harold stared at the car for a long time. Then he laughed softly. Bao kept the key, but he never knew I had a spare. I clutched Eleanor's wallet in my hand. The man in the suit asked, "Do you still dream about that girl?" Harold turned his head sharply. "Which girl?" "The one in the red coat." Harold went quiet. Then he said, "No, I dream about the one in the white dress." The air in the warehouse dropped cold. Mary was still in the back seat, but the men did not see her. Harold reached out with a trembling hand and touched the dented front of the cab. That night, if the girl in red had not come out of nowhere, everything would have been different. The suited man sighed. "Grandfather!" "She ran into the road," Harold snapped. Bao panicked. I told him to keep going, but the fool stopped. When I got out, she was still breathing. She looked right at me. You know what she said? His mouth curled. She said, "Call my mother." He gave a dry laugh. I hated that sentence. I bit down hard. Mary looked at me. Her eyes were calm, as if she had heard this confession 1,000 times. Harold continued. Then the other girl appeared. The white dress, standing by the cemetery gate. I thought she was a witness. I ran after her. She vanished. When I came back, Bao was crying like a woman. The suited man lowered his voice. "Enough. We should leave." "No," Harold said. "I want to drive." "You can't drive anymore." I said I want to drive. The man hesitated. Then he opened the taxi door. Somehow, the old cab started when Harold turned his spare key. The engine coughed like something dead waking up. Black smoke poured from the exhaust. Harold dragged himself from the wheelchair into the driver's seat. The man in the suit stood outside in panic. "This is insane." Harold smiled. "She'll be on the road tonight. I know she will. She comes every year. But this time I won't break." The taxi roared. The warehouse door stood open. I ran out and shouted, "Stop!" Harold saw me through the cracked windshield. For 1 second, his eyes widened. Maybe my face looked too much like my father's when he was young. "Bao," he whispered. I raised Eleanor's wallet. "It's over." Harold stared at the wallet. His face twisted. Not because he feared the police, because he feared the thing sitting in the back seat. Mary. This time he saw her. I knew it because he began to shake. Mary leaned forward behind him and whispered into his ear, "You have driven long enough." Harold screamed. The taxi shot out of the warehouse. I jumped aside as the taxi tore past me and turned toward Archer Avenue. I shouted at the suited man, "Call the police!" Then I ran to my borrowed car and followed. Archer Avenue that night did not feel like a road in the living world. Rain dragged across the windshield. Streetlights stretched into long yellow scars. Ahead, the old taxi swerved from lane to lane, impossible and fast. I called 911 on speaker. This time, the call went through. I gave the location, the situation, everything I could say without sounding insane. Then I saw a white shape on the shoulder ahead. Mary. She stood in the rain before the gates of Resurrection Cemetery. The taxi did not slow down. I heard Harold screaming. He pressed the gas. The cab lunged straight at the girl in the white dress. In the instant the headlights touched her, Mary did not move. She only turned her head toward me and smiled. The taxi passed through her. Then it stopped as if it had struck an invisible wall. The rear end whipped sideways. The tires screamed over wet pavement. The cab slammed into the cemetery fence with a terrible metallic crash. I braked hard and stopped several yards away. I ran into the rain. The taxi was jammed into the iron fence. The front was crushed. Smoke rose from the engine. Harold was still alive. He was pinned behind the steering wheel, eyes wide behind shattered glass. I tried the door. It would not open. He looked at me and moved his lips. I leaned closer. "Where is she?" he whispered. "Mary." He shook his head in terror. "No, the red one." I turned. Inside the cemetery fence, beneath the trembling headlights, a young woman stood among the graves. Not Mary. She wore a red coat, brown hair dark with rain. One foot wore a shoe. The other was bare. Eleanor Blake. I do not know whether I was seeing a ghost, a hallucination, or a truth buried too long finally taking shape. Eleanor looked at Harold. Not with rage. Not with screaming. Only with sadness. Harold began to cry. "I'm sorry," he wheezed. "I'm sorry." Eleanor stepped closer to the fence. Mary appeared beside her. The two women stood together. One in white, one in red. Two deaths on the same road. One became a legend. One was erased from the story. Sirens approached from far away. Harold grabbed my hand. His fingers were ice cold. "Tell her I didn't mean to." I looked at him. "You meant to leave her there." His eyes dimmed. A second later, Harold Whitman died. When I looked back, Mary and Eleanor were gone. Only two misty handprints remained on the iron fence beside the impact scar. The police found everything in the warehouse. Eleanor's wallet. The shoe. The red scarf. Pieces of old paperwork Harold had hidden for decades. Most important, they found a small tape recorder inside the taxi. Harold had once used it to record business calls. Somehow, it still held part of the tape from the night in 1987. On the recording, there was rain, a breaking sound. My father sobbing. Harold shouting. And a weak young woman's voice saying, "Please call my mother." Eleanor Blake's case was finally closed after almost 40 years. They found her remains in a wooded area near the cemetery, exactly where Harold had hidden her. My father, Bautran, was no longer alive to face judgment. But his name entered the file as an accomplice who helped conceal the accident. I read the news article again and again. Each time it hurt. I wanted to hate him. I wanted to forgive him. But some sins do not disappear because the sinner is dead. They simply pass to the living like a heavy suitcase left at the door. I told my mother everything. She sat quietly for a long time. Then she said, "At least she finally went home." I did not know whether she meant Eleanor or Mary, maybe both. 1 week later, I brought Lily to visit her grandmother. My daughter asked why my eyes looked sad. I told her, "Because your dad learned something very late." "What?" I looked at her small face. "If someone needs help, you stop. But if you do something wrong, you also have to stop long enough to tell the truth." Lily did not understand all of it. She only hugged me. For the first time in years, I cried. I stopped driving nights. At least that is what I told everyone. There is one thing I have never told anyone. 3 months after Harold died, I found an envelope in my mailbox. No stamp, no return address. Inside was an old photograph. A dance hall. Probably from the 1930s. In the center of a blurred crowd, a girl in a white dress stood with her back to the camera. Beside her was a young man in a dark suit. His face had been scratched out. On the back of the photograph, someone had written one sentence: "Thank you for stopping." I kept the picture in my drawer. I thought it was over. Then last night, I drove home after visiting my mother. I was not working. I was not carrying a passenger. It was an ordinary night. An accident blocked my usual route, and my GPS suggested another way: Archer Avenue. I stared at the screen for a long time. Then I laughed at myself. A road is only a road. The dead had been found. The truth had been spoken. There was no reason to be afraid. I turned onto Archer. Rain began to fall, very lightly. The streetlights covered the pavement in a tired yellow glow. As I neared Resurrection Cemetery, I saw someone standing on the shoulder, a girl in a white dress. I hit the brakes. She turned. It was not Mary. It was not Eleanor. This girl was younger. Black hair, brown eyes, a face so familiar that my heart seemed to stop. I opened my door and stepped into the rain. Lily, my daughter, stood there in the white dress she had once worn for a school performance. But Lily was at home with her mother. I had spoken to her 10 minutes earlier. "Lily," I shouted. The girl looked at me and shook her head. Not my daughter, only her face, a few years older than I had ever seen it. A version of her future. The girl pointed behind me. I turned. A truck was coming fast. Its headlights swayed. The driver was asleep, or drunk, or lost in some private darkness. My car was half on the shoulder and half in the lane. If I had still been inside, the truck would have crushed the driver's seat. I leaped back as the truck tore past and smashed into my car, spinning it across the road. Metal burst open in the night. I fell onto the wet grass. When I looked up, the girl with Lily's face stood before the cemetery gate. Mary stood beside her. So did Eleanor. The three of them looked at me. Then the girl with my daughter's face said, "This time you stopped." I blinked. They were gone. Police arrived 10 minutes later. The truck driver lived. I walked away with scratches. No one understood how I had gotten out of the car in time. I did not explain. But while I sat in the ambulance, my phone buzzed. It was a message from Lily. "Dad, are you okay? I just had a bad dream. I saw a girl in a white dress telling me to call you." I looked toward the gates of Resurrection Cemetery. The rain had stopped. The black iron fence stood still in the dark. For one brief second, I saw an old yellow taxi moving slowly along Archer Avenue. No one was in the driver's seat. In the back seat sat two girls, one in white, one in red. They did not look at me. They looked down the road ahead, where the city lights faded into mist. The taxi passed the cemetery gates. Then it vanished. Since then, whenever someone asks whether I believe Resurrection Mary is real, I do not answer right away. I ask them one question. If you saw a girl standing on the side of the road after midnight, asking for a ride, would you stop? Most people laugh. They say of course they would not. They say they are not stupid. They say no one picks up strangers anymore. I laugh with them, but inside I always think the same thing. Maybe Mary is not looking for brave people. Maybe she is not even looking for good people. Maybe she is looking for people moving too fast past guilt, regret, and the things they should have done but did not. And if one night she stands by the road and looks at you, maybe she does not need a ride at all. Maybe she only wants to know whether you are willing to stop. If this story made you look twice at an empty road, follow the channel for more true place horror stories, urban legends, and mysteries that refuse to stay buried. And tonight, if you pass a lonely cemetery road and see someone waiting in the rain, Ask yourself one question before you drive on. What if she is not asking for a ride, but giving you one last chance to stop? Some roads are only haunted because people keep telling stories about them. But Sweet Hollow Road is different. On this narrow stretch of Long Island, drivers say their cars move when no one is touching them. They stop beneath the old bridge, shift into neutral, and wait. Then, slowly, impossibly, the car begins to roll forward, as if small invisible hands are pushing from behind. Most people believe those hands belong to children who died in an accident long ago. Children still trying to save strangers from the same fate. But what if that story was only the soft version? What if the children were not pushing cars to save people at all? What if they were looking for one car in particular? And one man who had spent his entire life not remembering why they knew his name. Tonight, we follow Aaron Bell, a roadside tow driver who does not believe in ghosts, back to the bridge he has avoided for 11 years. What he finds beneath Sweet Hollow Road will not only uncover the truth behind a local legend, it will uncover the truth about himself. Sweet Hollow Road is an actual road in the Huntington/Melville area of Long Island, New York, frequently mentioned alongside Mount Misery and West Hills in local ghost stories. One well-known legend claims that if you stop your car under the overpass and put it in neutral, invisible children will push your vehicle, a phenomenon typically attributed to a chilling tale about a past school bus accident. However, this is strictly local folklore, not a verified historical event. The closer Aaron got to West Hills, the emptier the road became. The last warm houses disappeared behind him. On both sides of the pavement, there were only woods and leafless trees. Dry branches crossed overhead like cracks in the sky. Aaron turned on the radio just to cut the silence. A late-night news broadcast crackled for a few seconds, then faded into static as he turned onto Sweet Hollow Road. He frowned and adjusted the knob. Only static remained. Then, hidden inside that static came a very small sound. It sounded like children laughing. 1.2s. Aaron switched the radio off. "Just wind," he muttered. He kept driving. The overpass appeared in his headlights like a low concrete mouth, dark and cold. Beneath it, a dark blue sedan sat crooked near the shoulder. The hazard lights blinked weakly. A woman stood beside the car with her arms wrapped tightly around her coat. Inside, a little boy sat in the back seat with his face pressed against the glass. Aaron stopped the tow truck behind them and turned on the yellow warning lights. The woman hurried toward him. "Are you roadside assistance?" "That's right. Olivia Grant." She nodded quickly. She was about 35, with blonde hair tied low and a face so pale it was hard to tell whether the cold or fear had drained it. "Maybe both." "Engine dead?" Aaron asked. Olivia glanced toward the bridge. "Not exactly." Aaron had heard that answer before. Drivers said it when they did not understand what was wrong with their cars. He took out his flashlight. "Start from the beginning." Olivia swallowed. "I was driving home. GPS sent me this way because the parkway was backed up. I didn't know anything about this place. Then, when I got under the bridge, the car just shut off. The lights stayed on, but the engine died. I tried to restart it. Nothing. Then my son started crying." Aaron looked at the back seat. The boy still had his face against the window, but he was not looking at his mother. He was looking past Aaron's shoulder, into the darkness under the bridge. "I called for help," Olivia continued. Her voice shook now. "While I was waiting, I remembered some videos online. People say that if you put your car in neutral under this bridge, then children push it," Aaron finished a little sharply. Olivia stared at him. "You know about it? I live here. I wasn't trying to test it, but the gearshift moved by itself." Aaron went still. "Moved by itself? I swear, it was in park. I was sitting inside with my foot on the brake. I heard a click. I looked down and it was in neutral. Then the car started rolling. This road has a slope." "No." Olivia shook her head hard. "It rolled the wrong way. I know because I watched a crack in the pavement move under the front of the car. Something was pushing us out from beneath the bridge." Aaron walked to the sedan and swept his flashlight over the tires. Nothing strange. He opened the hood. The smell of warm plastic and cold metal rose into the air. He checked the battery, the cables, the fluid levels. No major failure. Maybe the cold had killed the battery. Maybe there was an electrical fault. Maybe the woman had panicked. Aaron held on to the normal explanations the way a man holds on to a fence in the dark. "Can you fix it?" Olivia asked. "I'm going to tow it to the shop. You and your son can ride in the truck where it's warm." Olivia nodded, but before she could turn away, the child in the back seat slammed both hands against the window. "Mom!" Olivia ran back and opened the door. The boy's name was Ben. His face was wet with tears. "He's standing there," Ben whispered. Olivia crouched beside him. "Who's standing there?" Ben lifted a trembling finger and pointed behind the car. Aaron turned his flashlight. No one was there. Only the dark underside of the bridge, concrete pillars stained with moss, and dead leaves dragging across the pavement. Ben whispered. "He says don't let that man tow the car away." Aaron heard it clearly. He turned to the boy. "What man?" Ben looked at him with wide eyes. "The boy in the red coat. He says this is not the car that needs to be pulled out." The words made Olivia begin to cry. Aaron hated the sound of children crying. Not because it annoyed him, because it reminded him of Mara in the hospital years ago. Lips cracked, eyes fixed on the ceiling, repeating the same sentence for months. "Don't let them push anymore." 1.3s. Aaron forced his voice to stay calm. "Ben, maybe you saw my headlights reflecting off the concrete." Ben shook his head. "He's standing behind your truck." Aaron did not want to turn around, but his body turned anyway. The tow truck sat about 30 feet away. Its yellow lights rotated slowly, washing the trees in pulses of amber. There was no one behind it. Then Aaron saw something that made his spine go cold. On the dusty trunk of Olivia's sedan, the road grime had been wiped into small marks. Handprints, not adult handprints, children's handprints. 5 of them, 7, more than 10, as if a group of small children had placed their palms against the trunk and pushed together. Aaron stood motionless for several seconds. Olivia followed his gaze and covered her mouth. "You see them too?" Aaron crouched closer. He tried to think of mud, leaves, gloves, a prank, but the handprints were too clear. Some even showed tiny lines in the palms, and every one of them faced the same direction, away from the bridge. Aaron stopped talking. He hooked the sedan to the tow truck faster than usual. When the car was secured, Ben sat in the cab pressed against his mother. Aaron shut the rear door and climbed behind the wheel. Before he drove away, he looked into the mirror. Under the bridge, where the sedan had been, a faint cloud of vapor hovered over the road, like someone had breathed out into the freezing air. Then a word appeared on the back window of the tow truck. Not written by a finger, written in breath from the outside. Stay. Aaron hit the gas. The tow truck shot away from Sweet Hollow Road as if something were chasing it. The next morning, Aaron brought Olivia's sedan into his garage. He checked the entire electrical system. Nothing explained what had happened. The battery was weak, but not dead enough to account for everything. The gear shift worked normally. The brakes were fine. No one had tampered with the car. Olivia came by near noon to pick up a bag from the back seat. She looked like she had not slept. Ben was not with her. "He's running a fever," she said. "He keeps asking whether the boy in the red coat got to go home." Aaron was wiping oil from his hands when he stopped. "Did you record anything last night?" "No. I just wanted to get out of there." "Then you should probably forget it." Olivia looked at him for a long moment. "You say that like someone who's seen it before." Aaron turned away. "I've seen a lot of things on roads. Most of them have explanations." "And the handprints?" Aaron did not answer. Olivia took the bag from the car, then paused near the garage door. "Mr. Bell, while we were sitting in your truck, Ben told me something." Aaron did not want to hear it, but he did not tell her to stop. "He said the children weren't pushing our car to save us." Aaron tightened his grip on the oily rag. "Then why were they pushing it?" Olivia looked down at the concrete floor. "He said they were looking for the right car." That sentence followed Aaron all day. By closing time, he was still sitting in the small office behind the garage, staring at a cold cup of coffee. Outside, the wind made the metal door tremble. Aaron opened his laptop. He did not know exactly what he was looking for. Maybe he only wanted to prove that last night had been nothing special. He typed, "Sweet Hollow Road children push car." Results filled the screen. Midnight challenge videos, haunted road blogs, local message boards. Stories repeated the same pattern. Stop under the bridge, shift into neutral, car rolls by itself, handprints appear on the trunk. Aaron kept scrolling. Some posts mentioned a school bus accident during a snowstorm. Others said no public records proved any such bus crash had happened on Sweet Hollow Road. A few people claimed the legend had been borrowed from another ghost road story in another state decades earlier. Aaron read until almost midnight. Then he found an old comment on a local forum from 2009, posted by a user called Hollow Witness. The comment was only a few lines long. "Everyone tells it wrong. There was no bus falling from the bridge. If you want the truth, find the white van that disappeared before Christmas in 1988. Ask Bell's Towing. They were the ones who pulled it away." Aaron read the last sentence again. Bell's Towing, his father's garage. Before Aaron took it over, the shop had belonged to Thomas Bell, a quiet man who smelled of gasoline, tobacco, and peppermint. Thomas had died of a heart attack 8 years earlier. He had never told Aaron anything about Sweet Hollow Road. Or maybe he had, and Aaron had forgotten. Aaron printed the comment and went into the old storage room behind the garage. The room smelled of dust, mice, and damp cardboard. Boxes marked by year sat stacked against the walls. Aaron searched until his back ached before he found the towing ledgers from the late 1980s. 1988, December. He turned the pages one at a time. December 17th. Minor accident on Jericho Turnpike. December 19th. Dead car in Melville. December 22nd. Police assist after a snowslide. December 23rd. That page had been torn out. Not worn, not loose. Torn cleanly from the binding. Aaron stared at the ragged edge. An old feeling rose in his stomach. Not fear exactly. It was the feeling of being a child in a hallway, hearing adults whisper in the living room and knowing your name has just been spoken. He stood there for a long time. Then his phone rang. His ex-wife, Erin, answered. Claire. For a few seconds, there was only breathing. Erin, Mara just spoke. His heart seemed to stop. What did she say? Claire began to cry. 11 years. 11 years without a full sentence. And just now she sat up, looked out the window and said, Dad took the right road. Erin could not breathe. Claire continued, her voice breaking. She also said, Don't let Grandpa take the children away again. Erin did not sleep that night. He drove to Claire's house at 1 in the morning. Mara was 18 now, thin, with black hair cut to her shoulders and eyes that always seemed to be looking at something behind the visible world. She sat on her bed, holding an old blanket. Claire stood in the doorway, pale and frightened. Erin entered slowly. Mara, his daughter, looked at him. Those eyes took him back to the night of the accident, when his car had skidded across Sweet Hollow Road. He remembered the scream of the brakes. He remembered the tree filling the windshield. He remembered the impossible sideways shove against the back of the car. Without that force, the car would have struck the tree on Mara's side. Instead, it spun. The impact hit Erin's side. He broke 2 ribs. Mara hit her head. After that, she almost never spoke. Erin sat beside the bed. Your mother said you were talking. Mara nodded. Do you remember anything? Mara looked toward the window. Outside, snow had begun to fall like white dust. I remember their hands, she said softly. Erin closed his eyes. Whose hands? The children under the bridge. Claire covered her mouth. Erin kept his voice steady. Mara, the night of the crash, did you see them? Mara nodded. They didn't want us to die, but they didn't want us to leave either. Why? Mara turned toward him. Because Grandpa promised he would come back. Erin felt the room tilt around him. Your grandfather? Mara nodded slowly. He pulled a white van out of there. There were children inside. Not a big school bus. A small van. He pulled it into the woods, not back to the garage. Erin heard the blood pounding in his ears. Where did you see that? In dreams. In the accident. In their heads. Mara touched her temple. They showed me. They kept pushing our car because they recognized bells towing on the door. Erin remembered it. 11 years earlier, he had been driving the garage's old pickup. The faded silver letters were still on the door. Bells towing and recovery. Mara continued. You have to find the white van, but don't go alone. Erin wanted to ask more, but Mara began to tremble. Claire rushed in and held her. Mara closed her eyes, tears slipping down her cheeks. Before silence took her again, she whispered, The boy in the red coat says, It's going to be cold like that night. The next day, Erin went to the only person who might still know the old story. Frank Hanley, a retired Suffolk County Patrol officer, lived in a small house near Cold Spring Harbor. Frank had once been his father's drinking friend. He was in his 70s now, bent with age, eyes cloudy, but his voice was still sharp. When Erin mentioned Sweet Hollow Road, Frank's face changed at once. Who told you about that? Doesn't matter. It matters. Erin placed the printed forum comment on the table. Frank looked at it, then slowly sat down. In the living room, a grandfather clock ticked heavily. Your father wasn't a bad man, Frank said. Erin gave a dry laugh. Every time someone starts with that, something terrible comes after it. Frank stared out the window. In December of 1988, a van was carrying children from a private daycare program in Melville. Not a public school, just a small group, 6 children and a young teacher. They were supposed to attend a Christmas performance at a church. Snow came early. Roads were slick. Was there an accident? Frank did not answer immediately. The van was missing for about 3 hours. Later, people found it, but not on Sweet Hollow. Where? Frank looked at Aaron. In the official report, it was found burned near an abandoned storage building. No survivors. Aaron felt the cold rise along his neck. In the official report? Frank closed his eyes. Because that was the report we created. Aaron stood up. What are you talking about? Frank raised one hand. Sit down. Why would you do that? Because the real van did not burn there. It slid off Sweet Hollow Road and got wedged down in an old drainage cut near the bridge. It didn't fall far. If we had found it quickly enough, maybe some of them could have been saved. Aaron gripped the edge of the table. Frank's voice became lower. But the driver hadn't just slid off the road. She was dead before the van went down. There was a wound on the back of her head. Could have been from the crash. Could have been from something else. There was cash in the vehicle. False papers. A small handgun in her bag. Everything was tangled. At the time, there was a larger investigation into a child trafficking ring hiding behind private daycare services. Some people in town were involved. Some had money. Some had authority. And you covered it up? Frank clenched his old hands. My superiors said opening it up would destroy families. They said the children were already dead. We couldn't change that. We could only keep panic from spreading. Aaron felt sick. What did my father do? Frank did not look at him. Thomas Bell was called to tow the van. At first, he didn't know the whole truth. When he learned more, he wanted to go to the papers. But they threatened his family. Your mother, you were only 4 years old. Aaron wanted to say no, but the word would not come. Where is the van? Frank stayed silent. Aaron's voice hardened. Where is the van? Frank stood with difficulty and went into the bedroom. A moment later, he returned with a yellowed envelope. Inside was an old map of the Sweet Hollow area. A small X had been circled in blue ink, set off from the overpass, deep along an old trail near a drainage culvert that had been filled in years ago. Frank said, "Your father couldn't save them, but he didn't bury them there either. He pulled the van into the woods because he was ordered to. After that, he went back many times, planning to dig it up. Every time, his truck died before the bridge. Sometimes it rolled backward by itself. Once, every door locked from the inside. Once, he heard children crying inside the tow bed." Aaron looked down at the map. "Then why didn't he tell me?" "Because every time Thomas tried, you got sick. Your mother had an accident. Part of the garage burned. He believed the people who buried the story were still watching your family. Or maybe," Frank hesitated, "maybe the children didn't want him to simply confess. They wanted him to bring them home." Aaron slid the map into his coat. Frank grabbed his wrist. "Don't go tonight." "Why?" Frank looked outside. Snow was falling harder. "Tonight is too much like that night. If you bring a Bell tow truck to Sweet Hollow, they will know." Aaron pulled his hand free. "Good." Frank shook his head. "You don't understand. Not every child under that road wants to be found." The sentence stopped Aaron. Frank whispered, "There was one child who was never listed as missing." "What do you mean?" "There were 7 children in the van." Aaron stared at him. "You just said 6. The file said 6, because only 6 families reported a child missing." "Who was the 7th? Frank did not answer. The wind pushed through the doorframe and made the lights flicker. Frank let go of Aaron's wrist, as if he finally understood that some things could not stay buried. "Your father adopted you in the spring of 1989, didn't he?" Aaron went still. No. Frank bowed his head. Thomas couldn't save the other 6. But when he pulled that van, he heard crying in the back. A little boy was still breathing. No papers. No name. No one reported him missing. Maybe he belonged to one of the people behind the ring. Maybe he had been taken from somewhere else. Thomas carried him out. He thought that if he could save one life, maybe that had to mean something. Aaron stepped back. "You're saying..." Frank looked at him with pain in his face. "You are not Thomas Bell's biological son." Aaron did not know how he left Frank's house. He remembered only the crunch of snow under his shoes, the map in his pocket, Mara's whisper. "The boy in the red coat says it's going to be cold like that night." He drove back to the garage in a nearly empty state. In the old storage room, hidden behind a tool cabinet, he found a small metal box that had belonged to his father. Inside was a child's red sweater, faded and stiff with age, a hospital bracelet with no name, and a Polaroid photograph. In the picture, a younger Thomas Bell stood beside a white van covered in mud. The rear door of the van was slightly open. In the darkness inside, a small hand reached out. On the back of the photograph, Thomas had written, "The 7th child is alive. He does not remember. May God keep him from ever remembering." Aaron sank to the floor. Every memory he trusted began to crack. His mother, no, the woman he had called his mother, once said he was terrified of the sound of brakes when he was little. He used to dream of being trapped in a cold box. He used to wake with the smell of gasoline in his nose. He had always hated red clothing without knowing why. And since childhood, every time the family car passed beneath an overpass, he felt as if many small hands were pressing against his back. That night, Aaron did not call the police. He did not call a reporter. He did not call Claire. He took a shovel, a flashlight, a tow line, a small video camera, and his father's old tow truck. On the door, the faded words were still visible. Bell's Towing and Recovery. At 11:48 p.m., he drove towards Sweet Hollow Road. Snow fell heavily. The woods on both sides of the road were white, but under the trees, the darkness remained thick and black. The closer he came to the bridge, the harder the truck became to control. The steering wheel felt heavy. The headlights flickered. The radio turned on by itself, filled with static. Aaron turned it off, turned on again. Inside the static, he heard children singing. No clear words, just a warped Christmas melody, distant and thin, as if rising from the bottom of a well. Aaron stopped beneath the bridge. The engine died. The cab light blinked 3 times, then went black. The silence was so deep he could hear his own heartbeat. He looked into the rearview mirror. Behind the truck, a thin layer of snow covered the road. First, there was nothing. Then small footprints began to appear in the snow. 1 pair, 2, 5, 10. They circled the tow truck. Aaron held his breath. The snow on the back of the truck sank in small patches, as if invisible palms were pressing against it. The truck trembled. Aaron shifted into neutral. In that moment, he was no longer a man in his 40s. He was no longer a garage owner, no longer Mara's father. He was a child in the dark, cold, thirsty, too young to understand why the adults would not open the door. The truck began to roll. Not fast, slowly. It was pushed forward, out from under the bridge. Aaron did not touch the wheel. The headlights had gone out, but he could still see the road because the snow reflected a faint blue light from somewhere deep in the woods. The truck rolled about 100 feet past the bridge, then stopped. On the left side of the road, between 2 old trees, a trail almost swallowed by brush opened into the forest. Aaron stepped out. The wind threw snow into his face. He turned on the flashlight. Its beam caught a line of small footprints leading down the trail. Aaron took the shovel and followed them. Sweet Hollow's woods at night did not feel like any woods he had ever known. Sound vanished there. Snow fell, but made no sound when it touched the ground. Branches did not move, even though the wind screamed on the road behind him. Every step felt like a step deeper into a memory that did not belong to the present. After about 10 minutes, he reached a shallow depression. In the center stood an old stone drainage culvert, nearly sealed by soil and leaves. A strip of rusted metal showed beneath the roots. Aaron knelt and cleared away the snow. White paint appeared, not stone, a vehicle. He began to dig. The ground was frozen hard. The shovel struck roots, rocks, metal. His hands went numb. His breath fogged thickly in front of him. After nearly an hour, he exposed a corner of the van's rear door. The white paint had yellowed with age. Across the door were scratches, many scratches, from the inside. Aaron dropped the shovel and stepped back. Somewhere in the woods, the children's singing stopped. A click sounded. The rear door of the van opened a few inches. It was impossible. The hinges were rusted, soil pressed against the frame. No living hand could have opened it from inside. But it opened. A dark gap appeared. Cold air, mud, and the smell of rotten fabric breathed out. Aaron raised the flashlight. Inside were small crooked seats, a few decayed backpacks, one child's shoe, and seat belts blackened with age. On the inside of the door, tiny handprints covered the metal. In the center of the floor sat a rusted tin box. Inside were photographs. Aaron lifted them with shaking hands. One photo showed 6 children in a daycare room standing around a small Christmas tree. Behind them stood a young teacher. And in the corner of the picture, slightly apart from the group, was a little boy wearing a red sweater. Aaron knew that sweater, the sweater in his father's box. He turned the photograph over. 7 names were written in blue ink. Emily, Rose, Peter, Caleb, Noah, June, and finally, Eli. Aaron Bell had not been born Aaron Bell. He was Eli, the 7th child. The child no one reported missing. The child Thomas Bell had pulled from the van and hidden from the world. The child the invisible hands had been pushing toward the truth for years. Not to kill him, not to scare him, but to bring him back to the place where the story had been buried alive. Aaron held the photographs to his chest and wept, not like an adult. He sobbed like something inside him had finally broken open. "I'm sorry," he whispered into the dark. "I didn't remember." A child's voice answered behind him. "We know." Aaron turned around. Under the snow-covered branches, 6 children stood in a row. They were not transparent like ghosts in movies. They were not monsters. They looked like ordinary children left too long in winter. Old clothes, pale faces, sad eyes. One little girl held a teddy bear with one missing eye. One boy wore only one shoe. A curly-haired girl held the hand of the young teacher. The child closest to Aaron wore a red coat. Not Aaron's red sweater. Another red. The boy looked at Aaron and smiled. "You came back late, Eli." Aaron could not speak. The boy in the red coat pointed toward the van. "There's still someone in there." Aaron turned. His heart struck hard against his ribs. He shone the flashlight into the front of the van. In the driver's seat, which he had avoided looking at too closely, a woman's skeleton sat held in place by the seatbelt. The skull leaned to one side. A dark fracture marked the back of the head. The teacher. But under the driver's feet, wedged between the seat and the dashboard, was a small leather bag. Aaron pulled it free. Inside were papers, photographs, a notebook, and a rusted handgun. He opened the notebook. The first pages listed children's names, schedules, and parents' phone numbers. The later pages were frantic notes. The teacher had discovered a child trafficking ring. She had not been taking the children to a Christmas performance. She had been driving them to meet federal investigators. Someone had chased them. She had been struck before the van went off the road. The last page was barely readable. If anyone finds us, do not trust the local police. Someone inside belongs to them. The boy named Eli is proof. He is the child of one of the men at the top. Aaron felt the ground disappear beneath him. At the bottom of the page was a name he had heard all his life, but never as the name of an enemy. Frank Hanley. Aaron stood frozen. The sound of falling snow grew enormous. Then an old voice spoke behind him. "Your father should never have kept that notebook." Aaron turned. Frank Hanley stood among the trees, holding a gun. He no longer looked like a trembling old man filled with regret. His back was straighter, his eyes colder. It was as if a mask had been removed after decades. Aaron stepped back. "You followed me. I knew you would come eventually." Thomas tried to bury this, but the dead never learned how to be quiet. Aaron gripped the notebook. "Are you my real father?" Frank laughed, a rough, dry sound. "No, your real father was worse than I ever was. But I was paid to get you out of town. That teacher stole you from us. She thought saving you would expose the whole operation. So you killed her?" Frank glanced toward the skeleton in the van. "I hit her to stop the vehicle. The accident happened because the road was icy." Aaron looked at the 6 children. They had not vanished. They stood behind Frank. No, not behind him. Around him. Frank did not seem to see them. "Give me the notebook," Frank said. "I'm old. I'm not ending my life in prison over a handful of children who died 40 years ago." Aaron laughed softly, tears still on his face. "A handful of children?" The wind stopped. The forest became perfectly still. Frank raised the gun higher. "I said give it to me." Aaron did not move. Frank pulled the trigger. But before the gunshot came, the tow truck out on the road roared to life. No one was driving it. Its headlights switched on and blasted through the trees. Frank spun toward the light. All around his boots, small handprints began to appear in the snow. They climbed onto his shoes, his pant legs, his coat. Frank screamed. He fired blindly into the dark. The shots cracked through the woods, then were swallowed by the snow. Aaron threw himself aside, clutching the notebook. Frank stumbled backward, tripped over a root, and fell onto the lip of the old culvert. He tried to crawl away, but the handprints thickened around him. There were no bodies, only hands, children's hands, dozens of them pressing into his chest, his shoulders, his face. Frank screamed, "No, I didn't abandon you. I was only following orders." A little girl's voice came from the dark. "You locked the door." Frank froze. Another voice said, "You heard us crying." Then the boy in the red coat said, "You told Mr. Bell to pull us away." Frank sobbed, "I'm sorry, but an apology that arrives nearly 40 years late does not open any door." The ground beneath Frank collapsed. He fell halfway into the old drainage opening and cried out. Aaron lunged toward him by instinct, but a small icy hand gripped his wrist. The boy in the red coat looked up at him and shook his head. "Not everyone needs to be pushed out." Frank disappeared into the darkness below. His body struck metal once. Then there was silence. The next morning, police found Aaron sitting beside Sweet Hollow Road with the notebook in his hands and the video camera still recording. The white van was excavated. 6 children's remains and the remains of 1 young woman were recovered from the woods after nearly 40 years. Local news erupted. Old files were reopened. Some of the people involved were already dead. Some were too old to stand trial. Some families learned, for the first time, where their children had been all those years. Frank Hanley was never found. Only his rusted gun remained in the old culvert, beside fresh scratch marks in the stone. Aaron turned over the notebook, the photographs, and all the video footage to investigators. But there was one part of the video no one could explain. Near the end, after Aaron had fallen into the snow and the camera had tilted toward the van, children's voices could be heard very close to the microphone. They were not crying. He kept his father's old tow truck, not because he had forgiven everything, but because some debts cannot be paid by throwing memory away. 1 year later, on the night of the first snowfall, Aaron returned to Sweet Hollow Road. Not to test the legend, not to prove anything. He drove under the bridge, stopped the truck, shifted into neutral, and placed a bouquet of white flowers on the passenger seat. The truck did not roll. There were no handprints on the back. No children sang through the radio. Only light snow fell, and the woods were quiet. Aaron sat there for almost 10 minutes. Then he gave a sad smile. "Sleep well," he said. He reached for the gear shift. Then he felt a very gentle push from behind. The truck moved forward. Not hard, not frightening, only a touch, a goodbye. Aaron looked into the rearview mirror. In the dim yellow glow, 6 small handprints appeared in the snow behind the truck. Beside them was a 7th handprint. A little larger, a little warmer, as if one final child had stopped standing outside the story and placed his own hand where it belonged. Aaron began to cry. The truck rolled slowly out from under the bridge. This time not to escape. This time to move on. Since then, people on Long Island still tell stories about Sweet Hollow Road. They still say invisible children push cars beneath the bridge. But the story has changed. People no longer say they push only to save strangers from a crash. They say that sometimes, if you pass through Sweet Hollow Road on a very cold night, and if your heart is hiding a truth that has been buried too long, your car may begin to move on its own. Not because ghosts want to hurt you, not because the road is cursed, because somewhere under the shadow of that bridge, small hands are still doing what the adults were too afraid to do. They are pushing the truth out of the dark. And if you sprinkle a thin layer of powder over the trunk afterward, you may see children's handprints. But look closely. Among them, sometimes there is one larger hand. The hand of someone who was saved. The hand of the 7th child. And beneath it, in the white dust, there may be a very small word. Not stay, not help, remember. If this story pulled you into the dark turns of Sweet Hollow Road, take a moment to like the video and subscribe for more true location horror stories from across America. And before you leave, tell me in the comments, if your car started moving by itself under that bridge, would you stay to find out who was pushing? Or would you drive away and never look back? Thank you for listening. Drive carefully tonight. Some roads do not want to be forgotten. Somewhere inside the Alaskan Triangle, a dead man's phone began to ring. 3 years after Mason Hill vanished, Nora Whitman heard his voice again. He knew her name. He knew about the red scarf. And he begged her to stop looking. Triangle. This story is fictional, but it is built on real places and real folklore. The Alaskan Triangle is a name often used for the vast and dangerous region between Anchorage, Juneau, and the far northern reaches of Alaska. The region is associated with stories of missing aircraft, vanished travelers, sudden weather, remote wilderness, and search teams that sometimes never find enough evidence for a clear answer. This episode also draws from the Tlingit legend of the Kushtaka, often described as a shape-shifting otter-like being that can mimic human voices and lure people toward the water. For this audio story, those real-world details become the frame for one fictional question. What if the thing calling from the forest does not need to look like the dead, as long as it sounds like someone you cannot stop loving? The mimic in the Alaskan Triangle. Every winter in Alaska, a new list appears. It is not printed across national headlines. It is not introduced with tragic music or red breaking news banners. It simply waits in police stations, rescue offices, and the phones of families who still jump every time the screen lights up after midnight. Name, age, height, color, last known clothing, last confirmed location. Then, beneath all of it, one short word: missing. In Alaska, missing does not always mean murder. Some people fall into glacial crevasses. Some vanish in spruce forests. Some are swallowed by sudden snowstorms on hunting trips. Some small planes disappear from radar less than 20 minutes from the runway. But there is another kind of disappearance people rarely speak about out loud. It is the kind that begins with a voice. Not the voice of a stranger, the voice of the person you love most. Nora Whitman heard Mason Hill's voice for the first time in 3 years at 2:17 in the morning. She was working the night shift in the emergency department of a hospital in Anchorage. Outside the glass doors, snow fell so heavily that the parking lot lights had become pale, floating halos. Nora knew nights like that. In Alaska, winter darkness was not only darkness. It felt like a closed room. The later it became, the more every sound seemed pressed flat. The heater, the soft steps of nurses on polished floors, the distant siren of an ambulance fading into wind. She had just given pain medication to a snowmobile crash patient when her phone vibrated in her coat pocket. Unknown number. Nora almost ignored it. Then she saw the digits on the screen, and her hand froze. That number should not have existed anymore. It was the satellite number from Mason's phone, the same phone that vanished with him on his final flight 3 years earlier. Nora stood motionless in the hospital corridor while the ordinary world kept moving around her. A doctor signed a chart. A nurse pushed a supply cart past. A drunk man groaned in the waiting room, but for Nora, everything pulled away. She answered. At first, there was only wind. Not the wind outside the hospital. Something wider. Emptier. The sound of a place with no walls, no doors, and no one close enough to help. Then a man's voice whispered, Nora. The phone slipped from her hand and struck the tile floor. A nurse turned around and asked if she was all right. Nora did not answer. She picked up the phone, pressed it tight against her ear, and heard the voice again. This time it was clearer. Nora, I'm so cold. Her throat locked. It was Mason. It was not only the tone of his voice. It was the way he said her name, stretching the last syllable the way he always had. It was the tiny fracture in his speech, a rough edge left by a jaw injury from an old flying accident. No one could imitate that. No one. Mason? She whispered. The line stayed silent for several seconds. Then he said, Don't let them look for me anymore." "Who?" Nora asked. "Where are you?" The wind grew louder. Beneath it came the sound of water, not rain, not plumbing. Waves striking stone. Mason said, "Bring the red scarf. The one you left in my plane." Nora closed her eyes. The red scarf. It was the last thing she had given him. On the morning of his flight from Juneau to Anchorage, she had wrapped it around his neck and told him it was too cold to fly without it. He laughed and said the cockpit heater worked just fine, but he kept it. Then his plane vanished. No wreckage. No body. No clear final distress signal. Only a smear of white static on a weather map. Later, podcasts and television specials called it another mystery inside the Alaskan Triangle. Nora hated that name. To her, the Alaskan Triangle was not a legend. It was an empty kitchen chair, a box of Mason's things in the garage, and a name she could not delete from her contacts. "Mason," she said, tears rising before she could stop them. "Tell me where you are." He breathed sharply. Then another sound entered the call, very soft, like someone laughing underwater. "Nora," Mason said, "when you come, don't trust my voice." The call ended. The next morning, Nora brought the recording to the Anchorage police station. Trooper Alan Reed listened to it 3 times. The first time, he kept his face still. The second time, he frowned. The third time, he removed his glasses and set them on the desk. "Nora," he said carefully, "I am not denying that this sounds like Mason." "It doesn't sound like him," Nora replied. "It is him." Reed looked at her for a long moment. "You know what voice imitation and artificial intelligence can do now?" Nora shook her head. "No one knew about the red scarf." "Did his family know?" "No." Reed went quiet. Outside the window, Anchorage looked gray and half-erased under fresh snow. Reed opened Mason's old file on his computer. Mason Hill. 37. Commercial bush pilot. Last route Juneau to Anchorage. Weather deteriorated fast. Signal weakened near the eastern edge of Prince William Sound, then disappeared. No aircraft recovered. No emergency beacon recovered. No passenger because Mason was flying alone. "There is something else," Reed said. "I was going to call you after we confirmed more. Last week, hunters near Yakutat found a piece of metal washed up on a rock beach. Part of the serial number matches the secondary locator from Mason's plane." Nora felt her heart hit hard enough to hurt. "Yakutat?" she asked. "Near there," Reed said. "A little bay that is hard to reach. No road access. Only float plane or boat, if the weather allows it. Then we go," Nora said. Reed shook his head at once. "No. You are not going anywhere. That is Mason." "It is a piece of equipment, Nora." "You heard the call." "I heard a strange call, and I am trying not to let you run towards something that may kill you." Nora stood. "For 3 years, I have been living like a dead person anyway." Reed looked at her. The hardness in his face softened for one brief moment. Then he reached into his drawer and removed an old photograph. A teenage girl stood in sunlight, smiling in a blue jacket. "My daughter," he said. "Emily. She disappeared 11 years ago near a river north of Juneau. We never found her." Nora said nothing. Reed slid the picture back into the drawer. Up here, he said, everyone has someone who did not come home. The only difference is whether we let grief lead us into the dark. Nora did not wait 2 days for the official search team. That night, she called in sick, drove to her small house outside Anchorage, and opened the plastic storage bin on the garage shelf. Inside were Mason's things: a gray wool hat, a folding knife, a flight notebook, a Polaroid of both of them on a Juneau dock, laughing into the wind, and the red scarf. The fabric was old, but it still held the faint smell of pine, engine oil, and the cheap cologne Mason always wore. Nora pressed it to her face and closed her eyes. In the darkness behind her eyelids, she heard his warning again. When you come, don't trust my voice. That should have frightened her. Instead, it felt like proof. A fake would tempt her with hope. The Real Mason would warn her. At midnight, Nora bought a ticket to Yakutat. Yakutat was not Anchorage. It was smaller, lonelier, and seemed to exist between two worlds. Black forest on one side, freezing ocean on the other. The plane landed in a mix of snow and rain. Nora stepped onto the runway and pulled up her collar. The air tasted like salt and ice, sharp as needles in her lungs. The woman waiting for her was Tessa James. She was a native Alaskan woman in her 40s, short, strong-shouldered, with black hair tied tightly behind her head. Tessa had worked with local rescue crews for years. She looked Nora over once, then glanced at the bag on her shoulder. "You are Whitman?" "Yes." "Reed called me. He said you might do something stupid." Nora pressed her lips together. He was half right. Tessa did not smile. Out here, half stupid is enough to die. They got into an old pickup truck. A small string of wooden beads and a black feather hung from the mirror. Nora did not ask what they meant. The truck left the airport, passed a few scattered buildings, and moved toward the water. Tessa said, "The piece of locator was found on a rock beach southeast of here. The official team will not go until tomorrow because of weather." "I need to go today," Nora said. "I know. Will you take me?" "I will take you close, but you listen to me." "What does that mean?" Nora asked. "When I tell you to stop, you stop. When I tell you to turn back, you turn back. And if you hear someone calling your name from the forest, you do not answer." Nora felt cold move along her spine. "Why?" Tessa kept her eyes on the road. "Because the forest here learns fast." They reached a small wooden house near the boat landing. A man was waiting there. Ben Sutter, in his 30s, wearing a clean beanie and an expensive new jacket, holding a compact camera. "Nora Whitman, right?" "I'm Ben. I produce a documentary series about disappearances inside the Alaskan Triangle." Nora turned to Tessa. "Are you kidding me?" Tessa shrugged. "I did not invite him. He paid the boat owner." Ben stepped closer, lowering his voice as if he were sharing something sacred. "I know the Mason Hill case. I am sorry. But if you are here because there is new evidence, maybe we can help each other." "No," Nora said. "I do not make cheap clickbait. I want to tell the missing people's stories with respect." Nora looked at the camera in his hand. "By pointing it at their fiancés?" Before the argument could sharpen, Tessa cut in. "The boat leaves in 10 minutes. Get on or stay." The boat was small, metal-hulled, with a low cabin. Its owner, Warren Pike, was a thin old man with a silver beard and a face wrinkled like dry bark. When Nora stepped aboard, Warren noticed the red scarf peeking from her bag. He stopped. "Why did you bring that?" Nora touched the scarf. It belonged to Mason. Warren looked at Tessa. The old man muttered, "Dead men do not need their old things. Only things pretending to be dead men do." The sea that morning was the color of dull steel. The boat moved past small slabs of drifting ice. On both sides, black spruce trees crowded the stone slopes. Fog crawled low beneath the mountains, making the land look unfinished, as if it had not fully risen out of the water. Ben tried filming an opening line, but the wind tore his words apart. Warren snapped at him to put the camera away. Ben frowned and asked if he really believed in the Kushtaka. Warren did not answer. Tessa sat across from Nora, both hands around her pack. After a while, she asked, "Have you heard the old stories about Kushtaka?" Nora shook her head. "Only the name." "Outsiders say Kushtaka," Tessa said. "They like to turn it into a monster because that is easier to sell. But the old stories are not that simple. Some say it saves people from drowning. Some say it leads people away. Some say it imitates crying children, friends, and the voices of the dead." Ben lifted his recorder. Tessa looked at him. "I am not telling this for your podcast." He lowered it. Tessa turned back to Nora. "The important question is not what it is. The important question is this. If you hear the voice of the person you miss most in a place where that person cannot be, why does it know?" Nora gripped the scarf in her bag. "Maybe because that person is alive. Maybe," Tessa said. "Or maybe the thing calling you has listened to you cry long enough to learn the sound you wanted most." No one spoke after that. Only the boat engine, the wind, and the water striking metal remained. Then the cabin radio burst into static. Warren reached for the dial. A man's voice came through the noise. "Mayday. Mayday. This is Hill Air 6. Nora shot to her feet. Warren went pale. The voice continued, "I am losing altitude. Cannot see shore. Nora, I am sorry." Nora lunged toward the radio. "Mason." Tessa grabbed her wrist. "No. It is him." Tessa held her harder. "Do not answer." The radio crackled. Mason's voice came so close it felt as if he were standing inside the cabin. "Nora, I can see you now." At that exact moment, the boat rolled violently. Ben yelled. His camera hit the floor. Warren killed the radio with a slap. The cabin fell silent. Nora stood there, shaking. Tessa still held her wrist. "Now do you understand?" She whispered. "It knows you came." The rock beach where the locator had been found lay beneath a cliff slick with black moss. The boat could not get close, so they used a small skiff to reach shore. Snow had stopped, but the fog had thickened. Every step on the wet stones was dangerous. Waves struck the cliff with a deep, wet thudding sound, like something enormous breathing beneath the water. Tessa led the way. Nora followed, then Ben. Warren stayed with the main boat. On the beach, Tessa pointed to a narrow gap between two large rocks. The hunters found the locator there. Nora knelt and touched the stone. Nothing remained except seaweed, broken shells, and driftwood. Ben filmed the area. "No wreckage," he said. The device could have washed in from somewhere else. Nora did not answer. She was looking at something near the waterline. A footprint. Not a boot print. A bare human footprint. 5 toes pressed into the thin mud between stones, pointed from the sea toward the forest. Tessa saw it too, and her face darkened. No one walks barefoot here, Nora said. No one living, Tessa replied. Ben rushed over to film it. This is incredible evidence. Tessa ripped the camera from his hand. You have no idea what you are doing. Ben snapped back, but before he finished, a woman's voice called from the forest. Ben? Ben froze. The voice came again, softer and closer. Ben, sweetheart. It was an older woman's voice, trembling, gentle, full of love. Tessa lowered her voice. Do not answer. Ben swallowed. My mother died last year. From inside the trees, the woman called again. Ben, I am so cold. Ben stepped back, trying to laugh, but his eyes were wet. Is this some kind of joke? Tessa held his shoulder. Look at me. Do not look into the trees. But Ben had already turned. Among the black trunks, a figure stood in the fog. A woman in a white sweater, silver hair over her shoulders. She faced away, as if waiting for him. Ben whispered, Mom? The figure began walking deeper into the forest. Ben tore away from Tessa and ran. Wait. Tessa cursed and chased him. Nora followed. The forest swallowed sound quickly. The ground turned soft and deep. Roots rose like bones. Low branches struck their faces. In the fog, every spruce trunk looked like a person standing still. Ben moved too fast for someone carrying a backpack and camera. Ben, Nora shouted. He vanished behind a cluster of trees. Then he screamed. It was not a long scream. It was short and cut off, like a hand had closed over his mouth. Tessa and Nora reached the spot. Ben was gone. The woman in white was gone. Only Ben's beanie lay on the moss. Around it were wet animal tracks, otter tracks, dozens of them, circling the hat before vanishing between the roots. We have to find him, Nora said. Tessa shook her head. No. We have to get back to the boat. You're going to leave him? Tessa spun toward her. You think this is the first time I have seen this? Nora went silent. Tessa was breathing hard, looking around as if the forest could hear them. It does not always kill right away. It makes you run. Separates you. It gives you the voice you want. Then you walk yourself into a place no one can bring you back from. When they returned to the beach, the boat was gone. Nora stared at the empty water. Only fog and drifting ice moved where the boat should have been. Warren! Tessa shouted. No answer came. The small skiff was still pulled up on shore, which meant the main boat had not simply left with them. Tessa lifted her handheld radio. Warren, do you read? Static replied. She changed frequency. Warren, answer me. This time there was breathing. Then Warren's voice came through, small and terrified. Tessa. Is that him? Nora asked. Tessa did not answer. Warren whispered, there is a little girl on the deck. She is soaking wet. She says her name is Emily Reed. Nora went cold. Emily Reed. Trooper Reed's daughter. The girl who vanished 11 years ago. Tessa gripped the radio so hard her knuckles went white. Warren, can you see her face? Silence. Then Warren whispered, she has no eyes. A violent metal crash came through the radio. Then water. A lot of water. Tessa called Warren again and again, but no answer came. They stood on the rock beach, miles from town, with no boat, no cell signal, no Ben, and no Warren. Only fog, forest, and the red scarf in Nora's hand. For the first time since the phone call, she was truly afraid. They found the old cabin near sunset. It sat deep among the trees, maybe once used by hunters or loggers. Its roof sagged. The door swung open and shut in the wind, creaking like teeth grinding together. Tessa said they needed shelter. "We do not walk this forest after dark. What about Ben?" Nora asked. "If he is alive, running around at night will only get us killed with him." Inside, the cabin was as cold as a cellar. There was an old wood stove, several rusted food tins, a slanted table, and long scratch marks cut into the walls. Tessa checked the room, then coaxed a small fire from the little dry wood left behind. The flame was weak, but it pushed the darkness back a few steps. Nora sat beside the stove and opened the recording of Mason's call. She did not want to hear it again. She played it anyway. "Wind. Nora, I'm so cold." Tessa listened in silence. When Mason's warning came, Tessa suddenly lifted her head. "Play that part again." Nora did. "When you come, don't trust my voice." Tessa frowned. "There is something underneath it." Underneath? The background sound. She took Nora's earbuds and listened several times. Then she handed them back. "Listen after the word voice." First, Nora heard only wind. Then she noticed something thin and low hidden beneath Mason's words. A whisper. Not English, not anything she recognized. But its rhythm made her skin crawl. Tessa said, "It is not only copying his voice. It is placing that voice over something else." "What?" Nora asked. Tessa looked into the fire. An invitation. Night came quickly. Wind swept over the roof. Trees scraped the walls. Sometimes, from far away, came the sound of running water, though no stream was near the cabin. Nora tried to sleep, but whenever she closed her eyes, she saw Ben's hat on the moss and the wet otter tracks around it. Near midnight, someone knocked on the door. 3 knocks. Nora sat up. Tessa was already awake, knife in hand. A man's voice spoke outside. "Tessa? It's me. It's Ben." Nora almost stood, but Tessa pulled her back. Ben's voice trembled. "I got lost. Please open the door. I am freezing." Nora whispered it could be him. Tessa said, "Ask him something only Ben would know." Nora had only met him hours ago. She knew nothing. Outside, Ben began to cry. "Nora, please. I am sorry I filmed you. I do not want to die out here." Tessa whispered, "Do not open it." The knock came again, harder. "Nora." For 1 second, Ben's voice warped, as if many throats had spoken her name together. Then the voice changed. "Mommy?" Nora went rigid. No. That could not be real. It was a child's voice, not any child. It was the voice of the baby Nora never had the chance to hold. After Mason disappeared, Nora learned she was pregnant. She told no one. 2 months later, after too many sleepless shifts and too much grief, she miscarried. No one ever knew if the baby had been a boy or a girl. No one had ever heard that child's voice. But outside the door, A child whispered, "Mommy, let me in." Nora began to cry without sound. Tessa wrapped both arms around her from behind. "That is not your child," Tessa said. "Takes grief, not truth." The child continued, "Mommy, I'm cold." Nora bit her own hand until she tasted blood, just to keep herself from standing. Then claws scraped down the wood. 1 line. 2 lines. 3. The sound dragged slowly, deliberately, as if the thing outside knew they were listening. Then everything went silent. Tessa did not let go of Nora until dawn. Then she whispered, "Now you understand. It does not only copy the dead." Nora stared at the scratched door. "Copies what we wish we could hear." The next morning, they tried to return to the beach, but the forest had changed. The path from the day before did not look the same. Trees stood closer together. Moss seemed thicker. Stones had strange, stretched shapes, like faces pulled long by water. Tessa's compass spun, then froze, then spun again. After 3 hours of walking, they found the same cabin again. Nora stared at the door. The scratch marks were still there. Tessa whispered, "Impossible. Are we walking in circles?" Nora asked. "No," Tessa said. "It is keeping us in one." Tessa took the wooden beads from her pocket and tied them around Nora's wrist. "Do not take this off." "What is it?" "A reminder." "Of what?" "That you are still you." Before Nora could ask more, an engine sounded above the fog. A small plane. Nora looked up. "Mason?" Tessa gripped her arm. "Nora." But the engine was too real. It circled overhead, moved away, then returned. Nora had heard that sound hundreds of times. It was the kind of plane Mason flew. Tessa's radio crackled. "Hill Air 6 to ground. I see 2 people under the trees." Nora shook. Tessa shook her head. "Do not." But Nora pressed the button. "Mason?" The line stayed silent. Then he answered, "Nora, finally. You can hear me." Tessa snatched the radio and threw it to the ground. "You answered it." The radio kept speaking from the dirt. "It's all right, Tess. I only want to take her home." Tessa froze. Mason's voice laughed softly. "You remember me, don't you? The little girl in the rain at Huna? You begged me not to take your brother." Tessa screamed and kicked the radio into a tree. It broke apart. But Mason's voice did not stop. This time it came from the forest. "Both of you have someone you want to see again. Why keep fighting?" Tessa grabbed Nora's hand. "Run." They ran without a path, away from the voices, through roots, mud, and thorny brush dusted with snow. Behind them, Mason's voice became Ben's, then Warren's, then the voice of a little girl calling Mommy, then Emily Reed laughing in the dark. Nora slipped on a slope and fell. She tumbled over stone and roots until her shoulder struck a rotting tree. When she stopped, Tessa was gone. "Tessa!" Nora shouted. No answer. Only water. Nora forced herself up. In front of her was a shallow river. Black water moved between rocks glazed with ice. Across the river, in the fog, a small plane lay tilted among the trees. White and blue fuselage. Broken tail. A partial registration number still visible. Nora covered her mouth. It was Mason's plane. She did not remember crossing the river. The cold water sliced through her boots, but she felt nothing. For 3 years, she had wondered whether Mason had suffered, whether he had been afraid, whether he had called her name. Now the answer waited in front of her. The cockpit glass was shattered. The pilot's seat was covered in moss and snow. The safety harness had been cut. There was no body. Inside, maps had rotted. The emergency kit was empty. A dented metal cup lay on the floor. And on the instrument panel, tied with parachute cord, was Mason's old voice recorder. Nora picked it up. The battery should have been dead. When she pressed play, it worked. First static. Then Mason's voice. Day 1 after impact. I do not know where I am. The plane went down after the NAV equipment went crazy. I saw shore lights, but no shore on the map. I hurt my leg. There are voices in the trees. I thought it was a rescue crew. The recording jumped. Day 3. I heard Nora calling me. Cannot be her. But the voice was so perfect I followed it almost a mile before I realized it left no human footprints. Nora trembled. Day 5. I saw it. Or part of it. It stood at the waterline, human shape. Bent back. Arms too long. When it turned around, it had Nora's face. The recorder crackled. Mason's voice became smaller. If anyone finds this, do not trust the voices. Cannot read minds. It reads longing. The more you answer, the clearer it becomes. Something slammed in the background. Mason breathed hard. Nora, if you hear this, I am sorry. I answered it. I thought it was you. A long silence followed. Then Mason began to cry. Says it can bring me home, but not home to our house. Home to you another way. Nora looked at the wall of the cabin. Deep scratches had been cut from the inside. Mason whispered into the recorder. It is learning my voice. If you ever hear me call, run. Then came his scream. Then water. Then the sound of laughter beneath the surface. The recorder stopped. Nora sat frozen in the ruined cockpit. Outside, fog thickened. Then, behind her, Mason said, I tried to warn you. He stood outside the plane. Mason Hill. Not 1 day older. Brown flight jacket. Wind-tossed hair. Gray eyes Nora had once thought she could look into for the rest of her life. Around his neck was the red scarf. But Nora's real scarf was still in her bag. She backed away. Mason looked at her sadly. You found me. No, Nora said. It is me. No. He stepped closer. The movement was almost right, almost Mason. But one detail was wrong. The real Mason had always limped on his left leg after an old accident. The thing in front of her limped on its right. Nora gripped the beads around her wrist. You are not Mason. His face stiffened for 1 second. Then he smiled. Then who do you want me to be? His voice changed. Mommy? Then Ben's voice. Nora, it's me. Then Warren. Then Tessa. Then Emily Reed. Dozens of voices layered together. Men, women, children, old people, the missing, the dead, and those who had never had the chance to live. Mason's body began to blur like a photograph left in water. His eyes shifted farther apart. His neck lengthened. His shoulders dropped. His skin grew slick and dark. Fine black hair rose along his arms and throat. Still, his mouth smiled. "You call us monsters," it said with Mason's voice. "But you call us first." Nora backed toward the river. "Stay away from me. You came here because you wanted to believe. We only gave you what you wanted. You killed Mason." "No. Cold killed him. Stone killed him. The crash killed him. We kept the rest from going to waste." From the trees, Tessa burst into view, her face scratched and bleeding. She raised a flare gun. "Nora, down." Nora threw herself aside. Tessa fired. Red light ripped through the fog and struck the thing in Mason's chest. It did not burn, but it screamed, not with one voice, with hundreds. The river boiled. Black heads rose from the water like otters, but their eyes were too human, too bright, too hungry. Tessa pulled Nora into a run. "Do not look back." Nora ran, but behind them Mason's voice cried out, "Nora, I'm scared." She stumbled. Tessa slapped her hard across the face. "He is dead." Nora stared at her, tears and blood mixing on her skin. Tessa said each word clearly, "And you are still alive." That brought Nora back. They ran across the river and into the trees. Behind them came the sound of water exploding, claws on stone, and the voices of loved ones calling their names in 100 different ways. Then they saw lights. 3 white beams cutting through the fog. A rescue helicopter hovered over a thin opening in the trees. Reed had come. 2 rescuers dropped a line. Tessa pushed Nora forward. "Climb." Nora grabbed the rope. Below her, the thing with Mason's face rushed out of the trees. It no longer tried to look human. His body was long and low, but it stood on 2 legs. Wet black fur covered it. His hands were webbed. Its face was still Mason's, stretched wide, mouth opening nearly to the ears. It grabbed Nora's boot. Tessa drove her knife into its arm, turned on her. In the final second before Nora was pulled upward, she saw Tessa standing in the fog, facing it. The creature spoke in a man's voice Nora did not know. "Tess. Sister." Tessa froze. Nora screamed, "Don't listen." But it was too late. Pain broke across Tessa's face. The thing reached for her. Fog swallowed them both. The rope hauled Nora into the helicopter while she screamed Tessa's name until no sound came out. 3 days later, Nora woke in an Anchorage hospital. Trooper Reed sat beside her bed. He looked older than before, unshaven, hollow-eyed. "Nora, can you hear me?" She blinked. "Tessa?" Reed said nothing. Nora turned away. "Ben? Warren?" Reed shook his head. "Not found." He placed an evidence bag on the table. Inside was Mason's recorder. "The team found this in your coat." Nora frowned. "I do not remember taking it. Do you want to hear it?" "No." Reed nodded. After a pause, he said, "There is one strange thing." The helicopter received an emergency signal from Tessa's radio, but when we recovered the broken pieces, her radio could not have transmitted anything. Nora looked at him. "Who called?" Reed took out his phone and played the rescue recording. Static. Then a young girl's voice. "Dad, I found them." Reed closed his eyes. Nora knew the voice before he said anything. Emily. The recording continued. Do not go into the water, Dad. Only pull the woman up. The other one already answered. The clip ended. Reed put the phone away with a trembling hand. I do not know what to believe anymore, he said. Nora looked out the hospital window. Snow was still falling. After a while, she asked, Do you think Emily is alive? Reed did not answer. But Nora saw the answer in his eyes. No. And also yes. A week later, Nora was released from the hospital. She returned to her small house in Anchorage. Everything looked the same. Mason's storage box in the garage, a coffee mug on the shelf, the gray blanket over the sofa. But Nora was not the same. She slept less, ate less. Every night, she heard water moving inside the walls, although the plumbing was fine. On the third night home, her phone vibrated. It was not an unknown number. It was Tessa's. Nora stood in the living room and watched the screen glow in the dark. She did not answer. The call stopped. A voicemail arrived. Nora did not want to open it, but her finger pressed play. Tessa's voice filled the room. Nora. I'm all right. Nora dropped the phone. The voice kept playing. You forgot something here. Nora backed away. In the hallway, water dripped onto the floor. One drop. Then another. Then another. She turned on the light. Nothing was there. When she turned back, the red scarf lay on the living room table, soaked through. Nora stood perfectly still. Her real red scarf had been taken by police as evidence. So where had this one come from? Tessa's voice spoke from the phone on the floor. You answered it, Nora. No, Nora whispered. You answered Mason on the radio. Nora covered her ears. No. And when you answered, it heard the way home. The lights went out. Darkness dropped over the house. From the kitchen, Mason said, Nora? She did not turn her head. From the bedroom, a child called, Mommy? She bit her lip until she tasted blood. From the garage, Tessa whispered, Open the door. Nora sank to the floor and held her head. You are not real. A voice very close to her ear answered, We do not need to be real. We only need to be close enough. The next morning, neighbors found Nora's front door open. The living room floor was wet with seawater. Long scratches marked the wall. Her phone lay under the sofa, still charged, but every contact had been erased except one number with no name. When Trooper Reed arrived, he found Tessa's wooden beads on the floor beside the red scarf, now dry and stiff. Nora Whitman was gone. No forced entry. No camera footage. Only a voicemail on Reed's phone, sent from Nora's number at 2:17 in the morning. He listened to it alone in his car. First, wind. Then Nora's voice. Alan, I found Emily. Reed closed his eyes. Nora's voice continued. She's cold. She wants to know why you never came. Reed shut the phone off with a shaking hand. He sat very still while snow covered the streets of Anchorage. No one outside knew that inside the parked police vehicle, a father had just heard the voice of the daughter he had lost 11 years earlier. His phone vibrated again. A new text from Nora's number. Only one line. Do not trust my voice. Reed stared at it. Then, from the back seat, Emily said, Dad, He did not turn around. Tears moved down his face. "Dad," she pleaded. "Look at me." Reed squeezed his eyes shut, but in the rearview mirror, he still saw a small wet hand rest on his shoulder. Between the fingers was thin webbing, like an otter's paw. No one ever found Nora Whitman. Her case was added to Alaska's missing persons files, beside Mason Hill, Ben Sutter, Warren Pike, Tessa James, and countless others whose living families had not yet learned how to let go. 1 month later, at a small rescue station near Juneau, the emergency radio switched itself on at midnight. The night operator was new. He had moved from Oregon and did not know the stories people told here. Static filled the room. Then a woman's voice spoke, soft, tired, and close. "Hello? Can anyone hear me?" The new operator reached for the microphone. He was about to answer when the older man beside him went pale, grabbed the microphone from his hand, and shut the system off. "What was that?" the new operator asked. The older man said nothing. He only stared at the radio display. The signal had come from a device code deleted from the system 3 years earlier. Mason Hill's device. In the dark room, the dead radio gave one small laugh, like water running over stone, like someone learning how to pronounce the next name. And somewhere out in the white emptiness between Anchorage, Juneau, and the frozen north, something moved through the forest. It was not in a hurry. It did not need to hunt. It knew human beings would always come looking. All it had to do was use the right voice, the right name, the right wound. And when someone answered, the Alaskan Triangle would receive one more file. Missing.